Novia stepped into a long, sterile white corridor, silent, empty, and echoing with each soft footfall. At the far end stood a stone door, pale and imposing in its stillness. "Master, may I enter?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the intricate white slab before her. "Come in, Novia," came Lenin's calm voice from beyond the door. Placing her hand on the stone, Novia studied the engraved, incomplete magic circle. She smiled faintly. This was a challenge left for her, a small puzzle of pride from her teacher. With a few quick adjustments, her fingers traced the necessary runes, completing the formation. The door responded with a soft hum and opened. "I remember it took you 6 hours the first time I carved that seal," Lenin remarked as Novia stepped in. "Now you've done it in 7 seconds. Was it too easy?" Novia smiled slightly. "It's been 14 years, master. I've come to recognize your patterns. They've grown predictable." "Only 14 years," Lenin said, leaning back in her seat. "There are mages who've trained under me for 4 decades and still can't crack that enchantment. But you," she gestured to the sofa across from her. "You're different. Sit." Novia obeyed, settling across from Lenin as a small table shimmered between them. With a flick of her finger, Lenin used telekinesis to brew and pour tea. "Did Rasmus contact you?" she asked, bringing the teacup to her lips. "He did, yesterday. You asked me to observe him, so I did," Novia replied, accepting her own cup as it floated gently into her grasp. "And?" Novia stared into the tea, her reflection swirling faintly in the amber surface. "You once called me a prodigy. But in this city, in this tower, we're all prodigies. When you gather too many stars in one place, they cease to shine brighter than the rest. They become average." Lenin tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "Rasmus isn't a prodigy," Novia continued, her tone calm and clinical. "He's a genius. We prodigies learn what we're taught and follow that path. Geniuses don't just follow paths, they make new ones. He's begun creating magic circles no one else has imagined." She handed Lenin a folded paper. On it, a magic circle hummed with latent power. Lenin studied it, then frowned. Even after close inspection, she couldn't decipher the purpose of the first 2 rings. Out of curiosity, she replicated the circle and activated it. A sudden crack of lightning erupted, blasting the wall ahead into scorched rubble. Lenin stared at the remains. "This formation, it's so simple. And yet." 7 rings, Novia said, her voice level. "That's all Rasmus needed. Our version of the lightning spell takes 14, and drains far more mana." Lenin looked at her trembling hand, then slowly began drawing her own research's lightning formation in the air. 18 rings. She released it. A torrent of lightning obliterated the far wall into dust and smoke. "My latest model," she said, voice laced with fatigue. "Multiple strikes to ensure the spell doesn't miss. But the mana cost is 5 times greater, and the recoil," she winced, her fingers slightly shaking. Then she looked at Novia. "You said he's like me." "No, he's already surpassed me." For a moment, Novia said nothing. Hearing such words from the great sage, her master, was like watching a mountain admit it had found something taller. "I'm sorry," Lenin whispered, her voice suddenly weary. "Your master has grown old and dull. You, though, you're still young. Learn all you can from me while you still can." Novia placed her cup down gently. "Even a dog doesn't abandon the one who saved it. If I left you behind, I'd be worse than that." "You were never a dog to me," Lenin said. "I never raised you with a leash. I raised you to fly, to find your own sky. That's what it means to be free." Silence passed between them. Novia stared at her mentor, unsure of how to voice the storm behind her eyes. "Don't become like us," Lenin said quietly. "Trapped in this tower, growing arrogant in our so-called wisdom. True wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's born from experience. From living." Novia finally noticed it. Lenin had been talking far more than usual. Her words carried weight and worry. "Master, is something troubling you?" she asked. Lenin sighed and paused mid-sip. She snapped her fingers, and 2 letters appeared from thin air. One bore the seal of the Angelus family. The other, Sancticus. Novia's calm broke. Her eyes lingered on the letters, on the power they represented. "What's inside?" she asked, gaze unwavering. Lenin placed the letters on the table and summoned a bottle of whiskey. Pouring herself a glass, she chuckled softly. "You always said you wanted to live up north, to see the never-ending winter," she mused. "Tell me, Novia, what do you think it's like?" "You're sending me north?" Novia asked, her brow furrowing. "Is that what this is about? A gentle push to spread my wings?" Lenin took another sip.
Not quite.
The letters are a request, from both families.
They want us. In the north.
1 week from now.
That soon.
Novia narrowed her eyes. If they're both involved and the north, could this be about demonic beasts?
I don't know, Lenin admitted.
But I doubt it's anything trivial. I can only hope we're wrong. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the weight of the unknown settle between them. But in her heart, she knew, hope was a fragile shield when forces that powerful moved in unison.
Count, are you awake?
Lenin's voice echoed softly from outside the door. Inside, Rasmus rose from the floor, sweat glistening on his skin after pushing his body to its limits. Without a word, he walked to the door and opened it, unbothered by his bare chest. My apologies if I've interrupted your training, Lenin said, her eyes briefly lingering on his toned, sweat-slicked frame. I've been expecting you, Rasmus replied calmly, gesturing to a chair by the table. Please take a seat, great sage. He turned toward the wardrobe to retrieve a black shirt. You're here to test me, aren't you? That, and to deliver what I promised. Lenin placed a silver ring on the table with a quiet clink. Buttoning his shirt as he approached, Rasmus sat down and picked up the ring, inspecting it closely. Tiny runes were etched delicately on its inner surface, so fine they were nearly invisible. It's a storage ring, Lenin explained, watching him. Its capacity depends on how much mana the wearer can control. The more mana you command, the greater its internal space. Rasmus slipped the ring onto his finger. It squeezed uncomfortably at first, too tight for his knuckle, but he instinctively drew mana into the finger. The pressure vanished. I knew you could handle it, Lenin said with a chuckle. And if I couldn't? Rasmus asked, eyeing her with a hint of suspicion. Your finger would have snapped off, she replied nonchalantly. But all's well. Inside you'll find 13,000 eclairs, 10,000 from me, and 3,000 from Marquis Rubin. Rasmus closed his eyes and visualized pulling out a single note. It appeared between his fingers, and he laid it on the table, a pale bill marked with the image of Gratlin Island and the number 1. This paper's worth 50 gold coins? He asked.
Lenin nodded. Yes.
Which means you're holding the equivalent of 650,000 gold coins. You can exchange it at any bank, but I wouldn't recommend lugging that much gold around. The bills are enchanted, made with a special material. Impossible to counterfeit. Rasmus held the note up to the light, searching for the secret. No mana imprint, no traceable resonance. Just ordinary to the eye. Now that you have the funds and all the knowledge I've provided on magic formations, Lenin began, folding her arms, I have a question. This magic circle you created, Gilles told me how you came up with it. Are you really planning to give it away for free? That formation is worth more than everything in that ring. You gave me a second chance at life, Rasmus said as he tucked the money into his pocket. You gave me access to knowledge, true power. Compared to that, money is meaningless. I think it's a fair trade. Lenin smiled faintly, slipping the paper into her own pocket. Then, with a sudden gesture, she drew a glowing rune into the air. Do you recognize this? She asked. Rasmus answered without hesitation.
A spark.
It's the ignition rune for fire spells. Without it, the spell won't cast. Lenin's expression froze. She hadn't taught him runes.
No one had.
Runes were dangerous to understand. Misuse could destroy cities. And here Rasmus was, identifying them with ease. I underestimated you, Count, she muttered as she let the rune dissolve. You weren't supposed to study runes. That was our agreement.
I didn't, Rasmus replied.
I studied magic formations. The runes were adjacent. Lenin's gaze sharpened. You're unpredictable. And that makes you dangerous. The world betrayed you once, and I fear you won't welcome it back with open arms. You're not wrong, Rasmus said coolly. But I don't take it personally. I'm not out to save or destroy the world. I simply don't care. So you'll neither build it up nor tear it down? Not unless it gives me a reason to. He met her gaze with unwavering calm. If I'm dragged into it, I might do both. Lenin sighed, leaning back. Better than walking blindly. You're not expecting clear skies every day, are you? Rasmus asked with a dry smile. If I could, I would, she murmured, frustration creeping into her voice. Rasmus understood now, this wasn't about his skill. This was a conversation to uncover his intentions.
A test of heart, not mind.
He stood and grabbed the suit hanging near the door, giving her the space she needed to process his answers. When are you leaving, Count? Lennon asked without turning to face him.
I'm not sure.
I plan to read up on the different cultures, see if any place feels right.
Anywhere in mind? Somewhere forgotten.
A quiet corner of the world where no one cares who I am, he replied as he slipped on his coat. But that's wishful thinking. I'm still a Blackheart. There are places that wouldn't care who you are, Lennon said, turning to look at him. With your mind, you could rule those places.
Is that another test?
Or just curiosity? Rasmus asked, his hand on the doorknob. Either way, it's not a bad idea. I'll consider it, great sage. Good day. He left, the door closing softly behind him. Lennon sat alone, staring at the fading light filtering through the window. A wild card in times like these, she whispered to herself. That's either a miracle or a warning.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Rasmus was reading a book in the library peacefully, but the murmurs kept distracting him and he couldn't help but listen to the scholars across his table. He tried to not be obvious when he eavesdropped on the scholars behind him. Have you heard that the great sage is going to leave the island? The first scholar asked the group of scholars in front of him. Her Excellency is leaving the island? It has been decades since she stepped foot off the island. For what occasion? The second scholar asked with his eyebrows furrowed. Novia said that the great sage is going to the north for a while, and it's not only her, but Novia is going to accompany the great sage on her journey, the first scholar answered. I heard a rumor that they both were summoned by a high-ranking noble of the north, he added. Is it finally the time for the great sage to spread her influence up north? The third scholar raised her eyebrows.
What nonsense!
The north doesn't need mages like us, they're savages. The fourth scholar responded as she looked around, making sure that nobody heard her words.
Enough.
It's not the place for talking about such things. If Her Excellency was indeed summoned to the north, it must be something crucial, and we should be wary of what's going on up there, the fifth scholar said as he looked at the scholars around him. If Her Excellency is involved, that also means we are indirectly involved in that matter as well, and we shouldn't tarnish Her Excellency's reputation because of us, he added. All the scholars immediately shut their mouths, and it seemed the fifth scholar was respected among his peers. Rasmus watched the scholars leave and they noticed that he was listening to their conversation the whole time. The fifth scholar stole a glance at him and gave a scornful look, telling Rasmus to mind his own business. While the scholars were leaving the library, Vidal came in and walked past them like a breeze, unnoticed by the scholars. Vidal had a huge grin on his face as he approached Rasmus. He then sat across from Rasmus as he glanced at the scholars. Coming back after missing for a week, Rasmus said as he continued reading the book in his hands. What did you get?
He glanced at Vidal.
Nothing, but something interesting is happening. The whole city is talking about the rumor Lennon going to the north, Vidal answered as he pulled his hair back and stared at the women scholars who were stealing glances at him. He didn't care how old or young those women were as long as he could have some fun. Although he had lost his power, his charm was natural. Since you still haven't decided where to go, aren't you curious about what's happening up there in the north? I don't mind if we go there because I heard the people there are rough. I want to experience it myself. Vidal stared at Rasmus, raising his brows repeatedly. Who said I haven't decided where to go? Rasmus put the book down and slid it toward Vidal. I found the perfect place. He tapped on the page for Vidal to look at. Vidal hummed as he raised his left brow and looked at the page. He scanned the whole page in less than a second and already knew the content. Eden Villa, a city belongs to the Republic of Cruin down south. Vidal said out loud. You want to see the ocean? He looked at Rasmus with a confused look. Eden Villa is one of the two biggest port cities in Neva. The only best place where you can live unnoticed because of how crowded it is and know every news around the world at the same time, Rasmus explained as he pulled the book.
Not only that.
I heard it's the only place where money rules and the noble who owns that city is someone that I want to meet, he added. When Rasmus was about to reveal his plans to Vidal, Novia came into the library, making all the scholars curious about the rumor. He watched Novia distancing herself from those scholars because she didn't know anything about the reason behind her leaving with Lennon to the north. Count, you have a letter from the academy, Novia said as she offered the letter to Rasmus. Thank you, Rasmus took the letter. When are you leaving? He asked as he opened the letter.
Tonight, Novia answered.
She wasn't surprised that Rasmus knew about her departure. I see, Rasmus nodded and didn't show any curiosity about her departure. Novia was surprised that Rasmus didn't pry on it because everyone in the tower would ask her about it. She realized and knew that Rasmus had no interest in her or anything else other than his own. You can leave the ring in the room when you're leaving, Count. Have a good day. Novia bowed her head, showing respect since Rasmus was a noble and honored guest while she was just a commoner and only a disciple of Lenin. I will, Rasmus nodded and watched Novia leave hurriedly. Rasmus read the letter and never thought the person who tried to reach out to him wasn't his former students, but rather someone far more important, Garrett Ernwind. He wondered why Garrett wanted to see him, especially outside the academy. This might be interesting, Rasmus muttered as he folded the letter after he read the content. The night was a lot more active than usual because Lenin and Nokia were leaving the tower. Everyone was summoned by Lenin, who gave a piece of information to them related to her departure. She also gave her authority to her trusted people who had been following her for almost 40 years to take care of the tower and its affairs. Rasmus didn't want to waste his remaining time in the tower by listening to that and kept himself occupied in the library. The morning came and Rasmus was already in his suit and ready to meet Garrett in Gratland City. Vidal was still asleep and he looked a bit annoyed by the sunlight that he looked like he would blow up the sun so he could get a nice sleep. Rasmus left the city and went to Gratland City, which was on the east side of the island, using a carriage. He saw a massive building in the center and it was a place for journalists from all over the world to stay on the island. Count Blackheart, a man in a butler's suit, approached Rasmus as soon as he walked out of the carriage. Young Master Ernwind sent me to welcome you and guide you to meet him. If you allow me, he said as he lowered his head at Rasmus. Rasmus nodded and allowed the butler to guide him. Rasmus was guided to a fancy restaurant and there was nobody inside but a man sitting at the table on his own. He approached the man and looked at the person who invited him. The man was Garrett, the one who suggested Lenin let Rasmus teach in the academy and gave him a chance to prove himself. Please have a seat, Count, Garrett said as he pointed at the chair across the table. Inviting me so suddenly, and it's coincidentally after Lenin left the island. I can't help but wonder if you're trying to make a deal with me without her knowing, Rasmus said as he sat down. You can say that, but unfortunately, it's not something like a grand scheme. I apologize in advance for letting you down, Garrett smiled as he watched his butler pour a wine into his glass. I would like to ask you for a favor, and of course I'll pay you, but I can't offer you more than what Lenin did. He pointed at the silver ring on Rasmus's finger. Rasmus stared at the man in front of him and realized that Garrett had eyes and ears on the island. He didn't expect the man in front of him to have an interesting taste of humor. I know that you're a man who values his time, so I'll make it short and simple, Garrett said as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and putting his hands together in front of his mouth. I have heard and seen the results of your teaching, and I found it too valuable to be missed. So I'm asking you if you're interested in helping me, or even the Ernwind family that will lead us in your favor in the future, he explained with a serious expression. Rasmus got his ears wide open and stared at Garrett with a stoic expression. He saw the butler offering him a wine, but he declined immediately. I'm not sure if I have the time to waste, even if it's something valuable. Unfortunately, what's valuable to you might be unnecessary for me, Rasmus responded. That's a shame, but at least allow me to finish my words first. Perhaps that might change your mind. Garrett tilted his head and raised his eyebrows. Rasmus nodded in with understanding because his hunch was telling him that it might be worth something. I have a younger brother who's around your age. He's quite narcissistic and perhaps so full of himself, Garrett sighed, and he looked a bit disappointed when thinking about it. But he has a talent that only a few people have. He has the ability to get anything he wants, but his greed has turned him into an idiot, if I must say, he added. Rasmus squinted his eyes and found Garrett's younger brother to be an interesting person. And where is he right now? Rasmus asked. Eden Villa, far from the Ernwind hometown, Garrett answered. Rasmus raised his eyebrows and then suddenly grabbed his wineglass and stared at the butler. Garrett couldn't hide his smile when the butler poured the wine into Rasmus's glass. It appears our interests align. Shall we have breakfast first before we continue? Garrett asked, still with a smile on his face. I don't mind, Rasmus smiled a bit as he tried to smell the expensive wine in his glass. They both enjoyed their breakfast without making a single noise and focused on the food. Garrett was a bit surprised that Rasmus had amazing table manners like a proper noble. He couldn't help but admire his table manners even though it was the second time he had a meal with him. I'm surprised that you're considering my offer. Are you perhaps planning to go to Eden Villa in the first place? Garrett asked as he put the utensils down. That's the plan, Rasmus nodded and wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. It's impossible for anyone to own land there if you have no business or relation with the port or trading. That city is one of the busiest cities and everyone there are either traders, merchants or owners of the companies, Garrett pointed out and wondered what Rasmus's plan was on choosing that place. You forgot about investors, but But I don't think that would be an issue knowing that I can use your brother's place to stay, Rasmus responded as he watched the butler pour wine into his glass. You're not asking me a favor without providing all the necessities for me, are you? He stared at Garrett as he took a sip of the wine. Garrett chuckled as he nodded and tilted his glass to the side so the butler could refill the wine. I would be grateful if you could make my brother snap back to reality. So I'll arrange everything for you, and I'll accommodate everything for your journey to the south, Garrett assured as he raised his glass toward Rasmus. For someone as powerful as you. What's the reason for your compassion toward your brother? I believe some people find this as an opportunity to monopolize the inheritance and become the sole head of the family. Rasmus narrowed his eyes, wondering about Garrett's way of thinking. The last thing you want as an enemy is from someone who shares the same blood. Blood is thicker than water, Garrett answered without hesitation. I value my siblings more than anyone else, even more than my parents, he added and emptied the glass in a single gulp. Rasmus found Garrett's personality to be intriguing because he could see behind Garrett's concern and blatant words to have a hidden meaning behind it. He didn't pry on it because that was none of his business and knew where to stop involving himself in someone's business. I remembered the moment you came to that meeting room back then and confronted everyone there. You're someone that's easily approached, but hard to please, and lastly impossible to lie to, Garrett said with a serious expression as he stared at Rasmus. So I'll be straight to the point of what I'll offer you in return. He fixed his sitting and raised his left hand. Everyone in the restaurant, the servants, maids, and the butler left the room immediately after they saw Garrett's raised hand. They knew the conversation was about to get serious and secrecy. I need you to control my brother and make him your lackey if you want. Although he messed up, his talent can't be overshadowed by his mistakes. People love him and I want to prevent him from thinking brightly and trying to take my spot as the future head of the family when he realizes he can do that easily, Garrett explained. If you do that, the Ernwind family will be indebted to you for life. You can ask me anything you want and I'll grant them all. Garrett fixed his attire and gloves that he wore. Not to mention, you'll have my brother. So it's a win-win situation for both of us, he said calmly as he leaned back. Rasmus already knew it would be a power struggle in the end. Anyone would have been fooled by Garrett's touching words, but it didn't work for him. Are you certain of this offer? Rasmus asked with a serious expression. I don't think you would waste your time planning to take more from me. You're greedy, but not fool enough to be blinded by that greed, Garrett answered calmly and with confidence. If you want more, then I can easily provide it for you. You wouldn't waste that kind of opportunity, don't you? He raised his brows. Fair enough, but you shouldn't be thinking that far ahead. You're putting too much trust in strangers, Rasmus responded as he poured himself a glass of wine. As I said, you wouldn't waste that kind of opportunity, don't you? Garrett smiled as he slowly reached out his hand for the bottle of wine in Rasmus's hand. Tell me when to go, and I'll pack my things. Rasmus gave the bottle to Garrett. Perfect. I'll send my butler this evening and all you have to do is sit down and enjoy the ride to Eden Villa. Garrett smiled and poured himself a glass of wine. Rasmus left after he got information about Garrett's brother and what he looked like. He was thinking about how to approach the brother, since it was as Garrett said that his brother was eccentric and full of himself. Just because someone shares the same blood, that doesn't mean they know each other better. I wonder which one is full of themselves, Rasmus said as he looked at the view from the carriage on his way back to the City of Knowledge. Rasmus packed his things and put them inside the ring, which made things a lot easier for him. He didn't have to bother to bring anything with him wherever he went. Vidal already knew about the meeting between Rasmus and Garrett, so he didn't have to ask anything and enjoyed the journey where he could eat anything he wanted. The sun was setting, and Garrett said that his butler had waited for Rasmus and Vidal at the gate of the city. The carriage was luxurious, but compared to the other carriages, it was nothing special. Rasmus noticed the carriage brought him to the Academy's airfield rather than the airfield at the City of Knowledge. He thought that Garrett might have prepared the blimp there since he was an executive at the Academy. Looks like there are people waiting for you. Vidal raised his head toward the people that had gathered at the airfield. Rasmus looked at his former students staring at the carriage with various expressions. Maximilian and Monica put on their cold expressions, Isidore and Aurelia frowned when they saw Rasmus in the carriage, and lastly, Alexander and Valerie furrowed their brows, couldn't believe that Rasmus had quit as an instructor. I'll wait in the blimp, Vidal said as he followed the butler to the blimp. Rasmus stood there and let his former students approach him instead. He furrowed because he was facing the sun as he watched his former students walk toward him. Count, Maximilian greeted Rasmus, but there was a slight sadness in his voice. What are you guys doing here? Rasmus asked coldly and stared at each one of them. I guess you arranged this for them. He looked at Garrett who stood behind the students. Garrett didn't say anything and only smiled at him. Can't we say our goodbye? Monica asked back coldly with a bit of disappointment and anger in her voice. I thought you guys didn't like me. I remember that some of you looked me dead in the eye on our first day. Rasmus raised his eyebrows with a gentle smile on his face. Is there anything you want to say?
He looked at his former students.
I heard you're going to the Republic of Cruin Eden Villa to be exact.
That's quite far away, Count.
Are you perhaps dissatisfied with the life you have here?
Isidore asked as he frowned.
The world is too big to waste it in one place. You might have the obligation to stay in one place, but not me. So I'll take this opportunity to explore the world, Rasmus answered. Well, if anything happens to me there. You guys can guess whose fault it would be, he jokingly said as he stared at Garrett.
Please don't joke around, Count.
These former students of yours are powerful families that could make me disappear without the world knowing, Garrett jokingly responded. Rasmus chuckled, and it made everyone shocked because they had never seen him this laid back before. They understood how much he wanted this freedom from the way he joked around like that. Well then, I'll ask you guys one last question as your former instructor, Rasmus said as he looked at his former students. We know in every story there's good and evil in there, but the truth is it's all just about human nature. Some people do a necessary evil, and some do good to deceive others. Now the question is, where do you put the line between good and evil?
He asked.
Everyone looked at each other, confused about the correct answer to the question. There's no line. It's all about the majority of people who decide the line, but what if the majority of people are deceiving the rest? So the answer is, there's no right answer to that because human nature is too complicated, Rasmus explained. Then what's the point of asking that question? Alexander furrowed and was baffled by the answer. The point is I want the 6 of you to band together. The 6 of you will be the one who decides the line, and your differences can create the true line that will guide the world. The world will depend on all of you, so prepare to carry that burden together, Rasmus answered. They were speechless by what Rasmus said, and it somehow made them hard to breathe. Good luck, and if you need my guidance, find me and I'll give you an answer that you don't want to hear, Rasmus smiled as he slowly took a few steps back. Until we meet again, brats, he bowed at his former students. Everyone watched Rasmus walk toward the blimp as the sun was setting. They felt like they had lost an important figure in their lives even though they only knew him for a few months. Lennon and Novia looked at the frozen windows of the blimp around them. It was a sign that they were close to reaching their destination, the north. They felt a tingling sensation in their fingertips, not from the cold, but rather from the anxiety of what they would encounter. Master, your tea, Novia offered a cup of tea to Lennon. It was a long journey. Lennon paused with her eyes staring at nothing as she grabbed the cup of tea. The world is so vast that if something bad happens on one side of the world, it might be too late to save it, she pointed out and took a sip of her tea, her brows raised and eyes empty. Just like what happened to the Rufinus kingdom when Rasmus's parents raised their banner and massacred the royal family, Novia responded. But that was only 2 people who caused that devastating destruction. So if this one is worse than that, we should consider a solution to that problem, Master, she added.
You weren't there, Novia.
Those 2 people had inhuman power, so you can't compare that one with this situation or any, Lennon responded as she shook her head. I do hope this one is nothing compared to that situation, she raised her brows, still with her empty eyes. They had been traveling for 2 weeks from Gratland to the north on a blimp. They were exhausted mentally and physically from the journey alone. The blimp arrived at the biggest city in the north that didn't belong to any family, the capital. There were dozens of blimps there, and most of them belonged to the Angelus family that had arrived a few days earlier. Lennon and Novia walked out of the blimp, and the first thing that welcomed them was a heavy blizzard. As a great sage and a disciple of her, they both coated their attire with magic circles that generated heat all over their bodies. Even in the thin clothing they wore, they felt warm, even their hair didn't get frozen by the cold. This is getting a bit too much, Lennon looked at the sky, but all she saw was snow moving around and covering the sky. Lennon raised her right hand and multiple magic circles were cast in an instant. As a great sage, she was capable of handling 12 magic circles at the same time like it was nothing. She then released a flare-like spell into the sky, attracting everyone's attention within the city and the neighboring cities. Lennon clenched her fist and the flare suddenly burst and turned into a massive barrier that protected the whole city from the blizzard while at the same time providing warmth. She did that so easily like she was trying to breathe, and she wasn't amazed by her creation. It's a right decision to bring you here, great sage. Astrea came to greet Lennon with dozens of Templars of Angelus following her from behind. Your Holiness, Lennon bowed at Astrea and then was followed by Novia. It must be an exhausting journey to come all the way here for both of you. Morrigan has prepared a place to rest for all of us. Come, Astria smiled as she pointed at the big black castle in the distance. All the people were staring at Lenin, who cast a terrifying spell that could defy nature like it was nothing. They knew who she was, but they had never seen her in person since Lenin never left Gratlin. It was their first time seeing her, and they finally believed the rumor about Great Sage as the most powerful person in the whole Neva. They entered the Black Castle, and Lenin didn't expect it to become a temporary base for the Angelus Templars. Something like that wouldn't happen in 1,000 years, or so that was what Lenin thought. What's going on here? The North welcomed the Angelus army like it was nothing and allowed them to stay here freely. Lenin looked at her surroundings and saw nothing but people in white armor around her. Everyone is waiting inside, Great Sage. Let's head inside. Astria pointed at the giant wooden doors that needed at least 6 strong knights to open. When the doors were fully opened, it was dark, and only the light from the hallway lit the stone floors inside the room. Lenin, Astria, Novia, and the Templars walked into the room, but they couldn't see anything beyond the door. The heavy doors suddenly slammed shut so hard that it startled Novia. At the same time, the room was lit up. The candles on the pillars and ceiling suddenly lit up and brightened the room, which revealed that it was a big hall. Lenin could see a faint trace of mana from what had just happened. All that with so little mana usage. The person who did it is extremely skilled, Lenin thought as she looked at the big hall. That person. She narrowed her eyes as she stared at the mysterious person standing behind the long table with the face covered by a hood.
Welcome, Chancellor.
Please have a seat, Morrigan said from the table, sitting beside the mysterious person. Lenin and Novia sat at the table with their eyes focused on the mysterious person. They both never thought there was a skilled mage like that in the north. If they had to make a guess, that mysterious person should be a sage, to say the least. The mysterious person slowly reached their hands to the hoodie and slowly pulled it down. Lenin and Novia were petrified when they saw a woman with long wavy and braided silver hair. They didn't expect to see an Orpheus among the people in the hall, and it was the first time for Novia to see one alive in front of her. So you're the great sage of Neva? The woman stared at Lenin with a cold expression that matched her bright blue eyes. For someone with such power, it befitting with the title, she added, and then stared at the other guests at the table. Novia couldn't stop staring at the woman's silver hair, and it reminded her of Rasmus because he was a half of the ancient race Orpheus from his mother's side. She could see the similarity of the woman's coldness and straightforwardness to Rasmus's. She wondered if all Orpheus were detached from worldly affairs and desires, but that was too far-fetched for her to think that way. We should introduce each other first because some of you might not know each other. Morrigan stood up as she looked at all the guests at the table. Allow me to introduce the people from the north. She looked at the 6 people who sat next to her. Morrigan, as the saint of the North region, introduced herself to everyone even though they already knew who she was. She then introduced a bearded muscular man with black long hair, wearing a black fur coat with a black robe underneath it. The Wyvern of the North and the Northern White Star, Grand Duke Artha Wyverncrest, Morrigan said. The 2 people beside His Excellency are Sir Aluka Wolfine and Dame Noir Wolfine, the Northern White Stars. She pointed at the man and woman sitting at the table. Aluka and Noir had black hair and wore black-clad armor and a black cape, which heightened their aura as powerful figures. The unsung siblings came from a powerful family that was on an equal sitting as the Wyverncrest family during the war against the tyrant. Everyone that wasn't from the north was astonished by those 2 people. The reason was that to have a title as the Northern Star, they needed to achieve the impossible. But Aluka and Nyer weren't just normal Northern Stars, they were Northern White Stars whom only a handful of people have achieved such a title in the past 100 years. The 2 women beside them are Cecilia Witelk and Garcia Moonshine. Lady Cecilia is a master physician and Lady Garcia is a genius alchemist. Morrigan pointed at the women at the table. Cecilia wore an all-white robe and black gloves like any physician would wear. Garcia wore a black and white suit with a black leather coat resting over her shoulders. The 2 women looked so dignified and beautiful at the same time. And lastly, my younger sister, Evelyn Sancticus. Morrigan pointed at the woman in a black dress wearing a dark silver circlet on her head. There was a saying that northern women were all like goddesses, and that saying wasn't an exaggeration. Every woman that was in the hall was envious of their beauty, including Novia, Lenin, and Astria. I think it's your turn to introduce your side of the table, Astria, Morrigan said as she sat down. There are faces that I didn't expect to see here, she pointed out as she stared at people who had come to the north with Astria. Astria introduced herself just like Morrigan did, even though she was the Saint of Neva, which anyone knew already. She introduced the man who sat beside her, and the only person who could sit beside a saint was someone as powerful as her. Beside me is Archduke Thalier Ardentis, the 7th Swordmaster. Astria respectfully pointed her hand at the man in black armor with a red cape on his back. Thalier Ardentis was one of the figures who reunited southern Neva and made it a prosperous continent. His status in the south was similar to that of an emperor, but he decided to devote himself to the people instead. As for his title, he was one of the 9 swordmasters in Neva, excluding the north. The man sitting beside His Excellency is Lord Archelaus Vane. The eyes, Astrea pointed at the man with long golden hair in a black robe with gold engravings that matched his hair. Archelaus Vane, known as the Eyes, was a well-known man who had prevented countless disasters. His instincts were said to be inhuman because of his keen eyes about his surroundings. He was also the best archer in Neva because he never missed and could kill a rabbit from another mountain. And I believe the men beside Lord Archelaus are well known to everyone, especially to the Sancticus. Astrea pointed at the 2 blonde men in shiny milk-white armor with blue capes on their backs. The 8th swordmaster, Esper Frostspire, and 9th swordmaster, Ulrich Ironheart, she introduced. Esper Frostspire and Ulrich Ironheart belonged to the Angelus Templar army. They were the only 2 Templars who revealed their identities. It was because they were the descendants of the families that had been guarding the Angelus family for hundreds of years. They were called guardian angels and were blessed with extreme talents and a divine power. The next ones are the great sage Lenin Sliver and Novia Sliver. Astrea smiled and bowed her head toward Lenin. Novia looked at her surroundings and she felt like she was the only one who didn't have any achievement to offer to the world. She was surrounded by great people and it made her feel small. Lastly, Sir Callisto Bladebane, the 6th swordmaster, the Blade Prince of the East. Astrea pointed at the man with brown hair in black leather armor with gold pauldrons wrapped in a blue cape on his shoulders. Callisto Bladebane had his background hidden by the sultans because he was like the embodiment of the Eastern Neva itself. His life was so valuable for many reasons that nobody knew. Other than that, he was skilled in countless martial arts and a master in all weapons. Although everyone had different backgrounds and could be stronger than the others, they stared at each other with the utmost respect. Those people who were gathered around the table were someone who saw the world through blood and sacrifice. In the eye of danger, their lives and status didn't matter.
Sonya.
The Orthia's woman said as she stared at the door with her cold gaze. You all may call me by that name. She stared back at the gazes that were pointed at her. Everyone wondered if it was her real name or if it was just a made-up name. They also wondered what kind of power Sonya had. Your Holiness, can you tell us what's going on here that you have to summon all of us here in the north?
Lenin asked.
I'll explain everything to all of you, Sonya interrupted as she stared at Lenin. Sonya began to tell the truth to everyone in the hall about the current situation and the danger they were going to face. First, she explained the prophecies that both the Sancticus and Angelus families had. The prophecies were about the end of time in which something had happened countless times before but was prevented by Sonya's ancestors. Sonya revealed the purpose of the Orthias in Neva, that they were the protectors of Neva. They were blessed with the abilities and strength to eradicate evil, and that was their only purpose. She then reminded them of the rotten truth about humans who tried to erase the Orthias from the face of Neva because Orthias were worshipped as demigods, which was against religious beliefs. It was thanks to these 2 families that we, Orthias, despise humans, especially these 2. Sonya stared coldly at Astrea and Morrigan. But I can't despise their descendants because they did nothing. She suddenly changed her coldness to warmth when she smiled at them. Everyone already knew the dark truth that had been hidden from the public. They all felt ashamed for what their ancestors did to the Orthias. At least that's what I do, but not the people of my kind, Sonya said calmly. Let's not dwell on it and focus on our current situation, she pointed out. Sonya unveiled the 3rd saint as the false prophet that would turn the world upside down, making evil righteousness and the good into blasphemy. The shocking part was the fact the 3rd saint might have been born into this world, and it was a sign that a powerful being had descended into Neva. These were the reports, Morrigan said as a few Templars gave each person the copy of the reports. You can read it thoroughly, she suggested. The missing villagers who turned out to be deceased in gruesome deaths and the missing woman who was suspected to be the embodiment of the 3rd saint were written on the reports. Not only that, but the disappearance of the demonic beasts in a single night in a territory where it was the most dangerous place in Neva was unnerving as well. Your Holinesses brought all of us here to go on an expedition to find and perhaps kill the woman? Thalier looked at Astrea and Morrigan. If we can, yes, but our mission is to check a specific area. Astrea paused to take a deep breath. We are going to go beyond the Black Cliffs, she revealed. The Black Cliffs was an area that wasn't drawn on the world map, an area specifically in the far east of the north where it was the territory of powerful demonic creatures and rumored to be where demons lived. People call that place the origin of evil because of the stories that had been passed down for centuries, stories that were enough to make adults couldn't sleep at night. Everyone leaned back and looked away at the same time as they took a deep breath. They didn't expect to go beyond the Black Cliffs and thought they would only go somewhere less life-threatening than that. The Black Cliffs is abundant in demonic energy, and I don't want to admit that we are too dependent on mana, which is almost non-existent in there. That place is impossible to go to for us where our powers depend on it. Novia looked disturbed and had to utter her thoughts. That's why we brought you two here, Astria responded as she stared at Lenin and Novia. We need your expertise in magic and magic tools and provide us with an immense amount supply of mana for us to survive, she explained with a serious expression. Lenin already knew her purpose the moment Astria revealed her plan to go beyond the Black Cliffs. As a mage, she had no chance against demonic beasts because demonic beasts were immune to mana to some extent, which made magic ineffective against them. That's not a problem. We both can provide what everyone needs, Lenin said with confidence. But the question is, when are we going, Sonia? Lenin stared at Sonia with a serious expression. How long it would take for you to prepare the supply for them? Sonia asked back. Give us a week and it will be ready, Lenin answered with confidence. 3 days, that's the time you have, Sonia responded immediately as she stared at the doors again with a cold gaze. 3 days. That's impossible. Novia was baffled by the unreasonable answer. Why in 3 days? Archelaus furrowed his brows with his hand raised, staring at Sonia. There's something that I haven't told you. As we speak, my 2 sisters should have entered the Black Cliffs by now. Although they're the strongest warriors, a week there on their own would be impossible, Sonia revealed as she crossed her arms. 3 days are enough because my sisters should have cleared the path for us to take, she assured. Everyone was in disbelief that there were more Orthias out there that they might meet. The fact that Sonia's sisters were out there on their own proved that the sisters were strong enough to survive in that kind of place. Is there anything that you want to ask? Sonia looked at everyone at the table. If there isn't, I suggest that all of you prepare yourself and rest well. The sooner the better. Grand Duke, may I borrow your time? Lenin approached Artha as soon as everyone was dismissed from the hall. Great sage, is there anything that you need? Artha's voice was rough and deep like a bear's. Yes, if there's a place where it's rich in mana so we both can work on gathering mana for the expedition? Lenin asked and realized how small she was in front of Artha. We don't have time to rest for the sake of everyone's safety, so we would love to work on this matter immediately, she explained for her urgency. But there's a risk, Your Excellency. The area would become scarce of mana for a very long time and would lose its value, Novia added to make sure that Artha understood the consequences of their actions. Is that so? Artha furrowed and realized the risk and the danger. I have a place in mind, but it's quite far from here. I'll sacrifice my land for this. Please follow me, he nodded with understanding. Thank you, Grand Duke. Lenin lowered her head to show her gratification while at the same time apologizing for the damage they would do. Morrigan and Evelyn watched Lenin and Novia leave with Artha. They knew that Lenin was going to gather mana for the expedition. Wouldn't your power alone should be enough to protect everyone and cleanse the area? Evelyn asked Morrigan. I would die for this cause, but unfortunately if I die now, the world isn't prepared to lose my power. Morrigan crossed her arms and stole a glance at Astria, who was talking with Archelaus and Thalia. Astria's daughter is still too young to carry the burden. I need to be alive until she's ready, she added. Her daughter is too soft, and it's really unfortunate. Evelyn stared at Astria. She knew that Astria was soft and she raised her daughter similarly. Yes, but as long as she's not naive, it's good enough, Morrigan responded as she nodded in agreement. Let us prepare on our side as well, Eve. Bring Cecilia and Garcia as well because we need them. She looked at Eve and then walked away. Ulrich and Esper didn't have time to rest after knowing where they were going. The Blackwall was a place where even someone like them who had been on so many missions to eradicate demonic beasts felt anxious. They had to make sure they were ready, and by doing so they had to train. Ulrich, Esper glanced at Nyer and Aluka, who were entering the training ground. Should we ask them to join us? It would be best if we could communicate during the expedition, he suggested as he swung his wooden sword. Ulrich nodded in agreement and began to walk toward Nyer and Aluka with Esper walking beside him. Sir Aluka, Dame Nyer, Ulrich greeted as he sheathed the wooden sword. Are you both planning to train as well? He raised his brows. Aluka glanced at Nyer as Nyer was the older one and it should be her to decide. Yes. I believe you have the same idea as ours, Nyer nodded as she removed her sword from her belt. But we are missing a person. Where's Prince Calistair? She looked around and thought he would be on the training ground. I'm here, Calistair appeared from the shadow. They were surprised that they couldn't sense Calistair's presence at all. They were the last people who would be unaware of their surroundings, but somehow they were caught off guard by him. I have been observing those two because I don't want to be rude to join in, Calistair said as he approached them and threw a thin string at the weapon cabinet. But since you guys are looking for me, I'm honored to be included, he smiled and pulled the string that was attached to the wooden sword. He grabbed the sword and swung it around. Nyera and Aluka stared at each other and they both nodded at the same time. They walked to the center of the training ground while the others were watching them. They both turned around and pointed their wooden swords at those three. What's the best training other than a spar? We both will be your opponent, Nyera said as she kept pointing her sword at them. Ulrich, Esper, and Kalistair smirked as they readied their stances. They had different stances and sword styles which made it interesting for Nyera and Aluka. At the same time, Astrea, Archelaus, and Thalia were making a strategy for the expedition. They were looking at the map specifically for territory beyond the Blackwall. Your Holiness, where exactly we are going to go in the Blackcliffs area? Archelaus asked as he observed the map and already knew the areas that he didn't want to be in based on the terrains and how isolated they were. Around this area, Your Grace, Astrea pointed at the map and made a circular motion with her forefinger. There's a city over there and based on Morrigan's intel, this city is where the corrupted resides, she explained as she retracted her finger from the map. The corrupted. Archelaus narrowed his eyes and there was a feeling of uneasiness in his voice. I have only heard about them through reports, and I'm sure Archduke Thalia also has so little information about them, he added as he crossed his arms. The corrupted were the people who had been exposed to the demonic energy that had turned them into minions of demons. They would lose their minds in exchange for a great strength that made them inhuman. Not only did they gain strength, but they were also granted immortality, but the bodies still decayed over time. There were a lot of cases where people who were desperate hunted for their crimes, and those who had lost the will to live would go beyond the Blackcliffs to become corrupted. Every year, the number of people going beyond the Blackcliffs increased and there was still no solution to that problem. Based on what Sonia said, we shouldn't be too worried about the corrupted since her sisters should be hunting them for us. But that doesn't mean we can take it too lightly, so we should prepare for the worst, Astrea responded as she watched Archelaus put marks on the map. We will take the safest route and if possible, we shouldn't engage in unwanted or disadvantaged situations unless it's the only way, she added. Archelaus and Thalia nodded in agreement because they knew that they couldn't handle the terrifying area of Blackcliffs. Your Grace, we are relying on your instinct and we all will move once you give us the path for us to take, Astrea stared at Archelaus with hope. Yes, Your Holiness. I will ask for the details of these areas to Saint Morrigan and her Templars. If needed, I will use my men as bait, distraction, or even a sacrifice during the expedition, Archelaus answered without hesitation. A small sacrifice for the greater good. My men are ready to die for such a cause, he assured. Astrea nodded with understanding heavy-heartedly because she knew it would be close to impossible to have no casualties on the expedition. You're not alone, Lord Archelaus. Don't carry that burden alone, Thalia stared at Archelaus. Archelaus forced his smile as he nodded with understanding.
It's getting late, gentlemen.
We should rest and prepare for the expedition in 3 days. I hope it will be enough for us to prepare, and may God bless us all with protection, Astrea said, but her eyes were empty because the last thing she could only surrender and rely on God for this situation. Archelaus and Thalia nodded in agreement and then they said their goodbyes before they went to discuss the expedition with the men they had brought to the north. On the training ground, Nyera and Aluka swung their wooden swords around before they stabbed them to the ground and rested their hands on the handles. They looked at Ulrich, Esper, and Kalistair on their knees, catching their breath with sweats coming down from their foreheads. Although Nyera and Aluka were the ones who stood, their bodies were covered in scratches and cuts. The training ground had become a complete mess with dozens of broken wooden swords scattered on the ground. It looked like a battlefield, a devastating one as well. If anyone saw the sparring, they would be shaken and terrified by how strong these 5 people were. The Northern White Stars. Kalistair scoffed in disbelief as he was still out of breath. I can tell the tales of how fearsome the Wolfine siblings are. He slowly stood up and put his right hand on his chest, respecting and admiring the siblings in front of him. Truly, we are humbled, Ulrich nodded, agreeing with what Kalistair said. If I may ask, how strong is the Queen of Swords? Nyera looked at Ulrich, Esper, and Kalistair. It's hard to say, Esper wiped off the dust and snow on his left shoulder. She might be a formidable opponent even for both of you, he answered. Kalistair and Ulrich nodded in agreement and there was no hesitation since they had seen the Queen of Swords in action with their eyes. I see. It's unfortunate that she's not here with us. Nyera looked at the sky and the barrier that blocked the blizzard. It's an honor for us to be allowed to spar with the greatest swordsman of Neva, she stared at them. Aluka nodded and bowed down to convey his gratification to them. As do we, Ulrich offered his hand for a handshake. Everyone shook hands and then left because it was getting late. 3 days had passed, and everyone was gathered in front of the castle. Unfortunately, Lenin and Novia were nowhere to be found and everyone was waiting for them. They couldn't go without those two, especially because they needed the magic tools to support them beyond the Black Cliffs. Everyone was fine if Lenin and Novia had to take their time, but the problem was Sonya. She seemed to be fine and unbothered by it, but the way she stared at the road without blinking her eyes once made everyone feel pressured. Finally, Sonya closed her eyes as she crossed her arms. Everyone didn't see anyone on the road or anywhere near the castle gate until they saw a carriage coming from the distance. Even for Archelaus, who had amazing eyes, he didn't see them coming until the carriage was visible on the gate. "Get the horses, we are leaving soon." Sonya looked at everyone from over her left shoulder. Artha and the others climbed on the best horses in the north that Artha provided. Since Artha wasn't allowed to bring his me with the reason his knights were one of the pillars of the north, he lent his best horses to everyone instead. Lenin and Novia hurriedly walked out of the carriage and they both looked exhausted with bags in their eyes. It was enough to tell that they both weren't resting their bodies for 3 days. "Sorry for being late. We have prepared the magic tools for everyone," Lenin said as she approached the group. "Each of you will have 2 rings, and make sure to only use one at a time and replace the first when it has run out of mana," she pointed out as she pulled out a few rings from thin air. Everyone was given 2 rings as Lenin said, and they could feel the immense amount of mana inside them. They were so eager to wear them, but they shouldn't do it because they had to cross the Black Cliffs first. "You managed to make a spare for everyone. You have my gratitude." Sonya looked at Lenin, but her words felt empty. "The journey is long, and I suggest you rest in the carriage. It will take a few hours, so make it count," she suggested as she climbed on her horse. The journey to the Black Cliffs had begun, and all the people in the capital were praying for their safety. The truth behind the expedition was done in secrecy because they didn't want the rest of the world to know about the truth. They didn't want to create chaos because of fear of the unknown and uncertainty. They were going to the far east of the North Continent where the biggest fortress was at. The fortress's name was Fortress of Arestin, named after a northern hero who united the North and passed away during the war against the tyrant. Lenin couldn't close her eyes because her anxiety beat her exhaustion. She glanced at Novia, who was asleep as soon as they departed from the capital. 4 hours of the journey felt like a blink of an eye for everyone because their minds were focused on what kind of danger they would face beyond the Black Cliffs. They arrived at the fortress and it shocked all the knights that guarded the fortress because they had no idea about what was going on. "We will be going on foot from here. No living animals dare to cross or even get close to the Black Cliffs," Artha said as he jumped off of his horse and looked at everyone behind him. Everyone got off of their horses and grabbed the stuff that they had put on their horses. The only one who didn't bother to get off the horse was Sonya, and everyone looked at her weirdly. "My horse can handle the pressure," Sonya said as she looked down at everyone in front of her. Everyone was curious if the horses that the Orthias raised were different kinds of breeds like the Orthias themselves who were different from normal humans. They didn't have time to distract themselves with such thoughts and began to gather around.
Your Holiness.
Artha stared at Morrigan as he went down to his knees in front of her. Nyer and the others went down to their knees behind Artha and lowered their heads with their hands pressed together. Morrigan stood there and began to chant under her breath. Ulrich and the others also did the same. They went down to their knees in front of Astria. The difference between the North and the rest of Neva was the way they did their prayer. The North lowered their heads while the rest of Neva raised their heads toward the sky. Sonya silently watched everyone pray with her cold and stoic expression. She then noticed a beam of light bathing everyone during their prayers. She stared at the sky, still with a cold expression, as if she wasn't amazed or terrified by the divine power that she was witnessing. "May God protect us all," Astria and Morrigan said at the same time. Everyone rose and they could feel the heaviness in their chests and shoulders blown away. They felt at ease and peaceful in their minds after they did their prayers. "Let's move," Sonya said as she rode her horse to the gate. The massive gate opened and Sonya led the group to the Black Cliffs. The snow was thick and their feet were buried in the snow, making it a bit troublesome for them to walk. They didn't have a choice but to endure it even though it would be a long and tiring walk. "That's the Black Cliffs." Artha looked at the black wall of a cliff in the distance. "Once we enter, we will rely on your ability, Lord Archelaus." He looked at Archelaus who walked beside him. Archelaus nodded as his blonde long hair was blown gently by the cold wind. They were standing in front of the Black Cliffs and immediately they could feel the pressure. They felt a slight headache while being there, but it disappeared immediately when Morrigan and Astria used their divine powers on them. "I'll protect you if something happens." Sonya looked at Archelaus. "You can stay by my side if that makes you feel at ease," she suggested. "Thank you," Archelaus nodded as he slowly walked toward Sonya and walked beside her. "Put the ring on, and don't use an excessive amount of mana because we don't know how long we will be dwelling with demonic energy," Lenin reminded everyone around her as she stared at the unnerving and ominous cliff in front of her. Everyone pulled out the ring that Lenin had given them and put them on carefully. They made sure the ring wouldn't slip because they only had a spare, and if they messed up, it would make things hard for everyone. Let us advance, Archelaus said as he pulled his bow from his back and his trusted commander by his side with a map in his hand. Everyone walked into the crack in the cliff since it was the only path forward. The cliff was blocking and separating the cursed land from the rest of Neva, as if a higher being had created the nature walls for protection. It was as Sonia said earlier that her horse was unaffected by the demonic energy and casually walked into the darkness.
If I may ask, Lady Sonia.
The sisters that you mentioned, are they like you?
Morrigan asked.
She was afraid that Sonia's sisters didn't share the same way of thinking as her because Morrigan and Estria's ancestors were the ones who hunted and killed Orpheus.
I don't know, Your Holiness.
One of them might be unbothered by your presence, but the other one is a different case. Sonia looked down at Morrigan with a cold expression. All I can say is that it depends on how you behave in front of her, she pointed out. The answer was so ambiguous that everyone felt a bit unsettled by it. We are about to enter the Black Cliffs territory. Be prepared, Archelaus warned because he could see the exit ahead. Everyone went quiet and prepared their weapons in a tight space inside the crack of the cliff. Suddenly Sonia trotted her horse and startled everyone when she went ahead on her own. They were relieved because they had no idea what awaited them outside the crack. The closer they were to the exit, they began to smell something unpleasant. Some began to cough and held back their gag reflexes because the smell became worse and stronger. Archelaus walked out of the crack and he immediately threw up because the smell was worse than the pungent smell of a decayed body. When the others came out, they all threw up because not only could they smell the pungent smell, but they could also taste the bitterness inside their mouths and throats. Lennon created a wind barrier to lessen the strong pungent smell because everyone wouldn't be able to breathe if they had to keep smelling it. Ulrich was petrified by the scene of dismembered decayed bodies where the body parts were scattered everywhere, even on the wall. This is my sister's doing, Sonia pointed out as she looked at the scene. How considerate of them, she smiled a bit as she chuckled softly.
Enhance.
Sonia got off of her horse and approached one of the corpses on the ground. She looked at it from up close by going down on her knees and reaching out her hand on the decayed torso. She rubbed her fingers on the wound in the torso and then smelled her fingers closely without hesitation. They died at least 2 days ago, Sonia pointed out as she put her hand on the torso again, but this time she put her hand inside the body. Everyone looked at Sonia's actions with a mix of disgust and shock written on their faces. They could hear the wetness in the sound Sonia made when she tried to reach something in that corpse's chest. They were amazed that she didn't feel disgusted or even disturbed by what she was doing. Sonia raised her eyebrows as she retracted her hand.
Still young,
she said as she stood up and flicked her hand that was covered in black liquid. Her hand became clean in an instant because of how fast she flicked her hand. So these are the corrupted? Novia approached one of the dead bodies as she covered her mouth and nose with a handkerchief. They look nothing like a human. She narrowed her eyes when she saw the anatomy of the corpse where it had 3 arms, 4 legs, and weird-looking bones that she had never seen before. They were, Sonia answered as she approached Novia. You can say that they failed to evolve. Not everyone is blessed enough to perfect the corruption process, she explained. Nobody in the group had seen a corrupted before, so they had so little knowledge about them. The records about corrupted were destroyed, missing, or stolen. The reason behind it was that the demon worshippers tried to minimize knowledge about demons and their brethren. Aren't they supposed to be immortal? Artha looked at Sonia with his brows furrowed. Only the perfect ones are. These are not greater than demonic beasts. Or you can say they're basically demonic beasts, but humans, Sonia answered as she looked around, making sure there were no corrupted around that were alive. If we follow the corpses, we should be safe because my sisters might have created a safe route for us, she said and realized they were safe. Is it really safe, Lady Sonia? Based on what you said, they were here 2 days ago, so there's a chance those corrupted are near because they might get attracted by these corpses. Archelaus was a bit skeptical by Sonia's suggestion. Compare your route with the corpses. Sonia turned around to look at Archelaus. If it matched, there shouldn't be any problem, right? She raised her eyebrows with a stoic expression. Archelaus grabbed the map and checked the route that he had made for the expedition. He knew that he had 0 experience with the situation he was in, but his instincts were the only reason he could become the greatest and prevent various disasters. So far, the corpses and the route are aligning, but are we really safe around these corpses? Archelaus asked with a worried expression because the responsibility for everyone's safety was in his hands. If I say it's safe, do you trust me or are you going to question my answer again and again and again? Sonia asked back. I'm here for the same reason as yours, so why are you so distrustful around me?
She added.
Archelaus wanted to say something, but Morrigan gently put her hand on his shoulder. All we have to do is be cautious. If something bad happens, she will take responsibility for it, Morrigan assured. Isn't that right, Lady Sonia? She stared into Sonia's eyes with a serious expression. Of course, Sonia put a cold smile on her face. Everyone followed Sonia from behind as she rode her horse and didn't pay any attention to her surroundings. No matter how Lennon tried to suppress the strong pungent smell with her spell, it made everyone cough and hold their gags. Archelaus looked at his map and the route that Sonia took, and they were still aligned as if her sisters knew exactly the right path for them to take. He realized that the sisters' experiences were similar to his instincts, which made him feel a bit proud of himself. How far are we from the city? Nyera asked as she looked at Archelaus.
6 hours at most.
There's a small village 2 hours from here, so we can take a breather there for a moment. Archelaus looked at everyone behind him, wondering if everyone had the same thought as him. Everyone nodded in agreement because the upset stomach was bothering them and slowing them down. The journey went smoothly without any sign of the corrupted, and they realized Sonia's decision was right. They admitted that they misjudged her because of her detached and cold personality, which made them suspicious of her.
The village is up ahead.
Be ready, Archelaus warned as he put his map away and grabbed his bow. Sonia suddenly stopped her horse and stared at something in the distance. Everyone held their breath and stopped moving as they stared at her anxiously.
Lord Archelaus.
There's one imperfect corrupted near the entrance of the village. Can you climb that tree and kill it? Sonia asked quietly as she pointed at the tree on her right. Hit it right in the throat.
It would be great if you could decapitate it in one shot, she pointed out.
Archelaus didn't say a word and immediately ran toward the tree and climbed it without making a single noise. His movements were like defying gravity because it almost looked like he was floating as he jumped and climbed the branches. Archelaus narrowed his eyes and spotted the corrupted aimlessly moving around near the entrance. He quietly pulled an arrow from his quiver and aimed it at the corrupted's neck. The bow and arrow were coated in mana, and Archelaus released the arrow with confidence. The arrow didn't make any noise and it hit right in the corrupted's neck, detaching it from the body. He looked down at Sonia as he nodded his head, telling her that he had killed the corrupted. How did you know there was a corrupted there? We can't see the entrance from here. Archelaus asked as soon as he landed. My ears are sensitive, Sonia answered. Lennon glanced at Sonia, shocked that Sonia could hear it even though Lennon had the ability to see and hear things from far away with mana. She realized that the Orthias were indeed a superior race and she wondered how could humankind have massacred them back then. The village is safe now. Get some rest, Sonia said as her horse began to advance. Once they reached the entrance, they were petrified when they saw a massive pile of corrupted corpses in the distance. They couldn't count how many corpses were in the pile, but they could roughly guess that there were at least a few hundred of them. Novia, isolate the pile.
Lennon ordered.
Novia created a barrier around the pile and isolated them so the pungent smell wouldn't bother everyone. At the same time, Lennon released wind magic to send the remaining pungent smells out of the village so everyone could rest at ease. Everyone made sure the village was safe and the Templars were patrolling the area so Artha and the others could rest. Sonia was standing in front of the pile of corpses and stared at it non-stop. Can they come back to live? Morrigan approached Sonia with Astrea. Definitely. They're dead, but not the essence of the demonic energy inside them, Sonia answered as she crossed her arms. Then we should cleanse the energy. There are hundreds of them and we should eliminate them before they become future threats, Morrigan said as she pressed her hands. Do you know what happens to moths when they see a bright light? You're releasing divine energy and it will only attract the corrupted even from behind the mountains. Or worse, something more powerful might come. Sonia glanced at Morrigan. What you're trying to do is only putting everyone in life-threatening danger, she warned. Everyone gathered after they heard what Sonia said. They looked at the pile of corpses and knew if they didn't erase them, it would be dangerous. But at the same time, they didn't want to risk their lives for this. We can do nothing, and we should do nothing, Sonia stared coldly at Morrigan. Morrigan didn't want to let this opportunity go, but her hands were trying to separate themselves. She exhaled deeply as she put her hands away. Rest. Don't waste your precious time on something unnecessary, Sonia said as she walked away. Everyone understood Morrigan's decision to cleanse the corpses, but in a world of survival, it was the best choice to look away. The route ahead is going to be rough because I made some changes. I'm not confident about my skill because we are currently the furthest anyone has ever gone beyond the Blackcliffs, Archelaus said as he stared at the map in his hands. We will be in the open because we are using the road rather than going into the forest like before, he explained. I have discussed this matter with Lady Sonia. Since we have gone deeper, the chance we are meeting with the real corrupted ones are higher. They roam more actively, which means there's no more safe route, Archelaus added before everyone questioned his decision. Everyone looked at the map and understood the reason Archelaus chose the road rather than the forest. They looked at the terrain around the road with the forest around it. There were hills surrounding the forest, and it made them an easy target for an ambush by the corrupted. It's better to fight in the open than in a small space, Arthur said as he nodded in agreement, but his face showed the anxiety that he couldn't hide. Is everyone ready? Sonia asked as she rode her horse. We don't have time to spare. We must advance immediately, she said with a faint sense of uneasiness in her voice. Hearing Sonia say those words with that tone, everyone immediately prepared themselves and gathered the Templars and the knights. They left the village as soon as everyone had gathered and continued their expedition. They followed the road and there were fewer corpses the further they went. The first time they walked beyond the Black Cliff, they would rather stay away from those corpses, but at this moment, they wished to be surrounded by those things. They heard faint screeched screams in the distance that made them on edge. Their fingers and palms were tingling as they held their weapons tightly. They had never experienced something like this in their whole lives, even for the Templars whose job was to hunt demonic beasts. Sonia stopped her horse and suddenly looked back at the distance, making everyone turn around and ready their stances. A fully evolved corrupted has a crystal inside their chest as big as a child's fist. Destroy it and it will kill them immediately. Get ready, Sonia pointed out and didn't try to coat her words at all with what was about to come since everyone already knew something was coming.
How many?
Thalia asked as he held his sword with both hands.
12 or 2.
Sonia answered.
Spread out.
They will alert the other corrupted when they find us, so make sure we won't get ambushed, she ordered. Archelaus looked at his men and signaled to them by pointing at the trees around them. He and his men hurriedly spread out and climbed the trees as they acted as the eyes for everyone on the ground. May God protect us all. Astrea closed her eyes as she pressed her hands, praying to a higher being where she was dwelling in a place where the root of evil resided. Slowly but surely they could hear loud thumping sounds like horses running wildly. Everyone's breath became short as their pupils trembled both from extreme anxiety and adrenaline.
Here they come.
Sonia said as she stared at the road they took that was covered by cold mist.
I'll guard the front.
Everyone take care of the rest, she added as she jumped down from her horse, walked to the front on her own, and disappeared into the thick mist. Ulrich and Esper were taking the rear with the Angelus Templars. Nyer and Aluka took the right side with Garcia and a few Sancticus Templars. Artha, Thalia, and Calistair guarded the left side with the remaining Sancticus Templars. At the center, Morrigan, Astrea, Lenin, Novia, and Cecilia were going to be everyone's backup if needed. Ulrich and Esper saw silhouettes behind the thick mist and they grew larger as the sound of footsteps became clearer. They didn't know what kind of corrupted that they were going to face, but they had coated their weapons with aura. The moment the corrupted showed themselves, everyone was shocked when they saw the corrupted wearing worn-out full-plate armor. The armor looked like it was from an old era, somewhere between 200 and 400 years ago.
Charge!
Ulrich shouted as he began to dash forward. Ulrich and everyone on the rear charged forward and clashed their swords and spears at the corrupted. Ulrich and Esper cut the first 3 corrupted in half with each swing like it was nothing. But they both almost lost their heads when the 2 corrupted swung their rusty swords at them so quickly. They barely dodged and immediately released a counterattack and decapitated them. They weren't given any time to breathe because the corrupted moved swiftly like seasoned knights. They didn't have the chance to find the crystal inside each corrupted that they had slain. That moment was when they realized how they made a huge mistake because the slain corrupted used the opportunity to cut a few Templars' legs or feet because of the low visibility. This isn't good. The heat from their bodies is making the mist thicker, Lenin pointed out as she created a magic circle and pointed it down. Lenin released a gust of wind and sent the mist away. That was when everyone got petrified because they had been surrounded by corrupted that were watching them from the forest around them. Archelaus' men who were on top of the trees suddenly fell and hit the ground hard with a few arrows stuck in their heads, necks, or chests. Archelaus dodged a few arrows that were coming at him, and he was forced to go down because of the small space he had. Novia cast a spell and created a mana barrier to protect everyone from arrows. She was angry at herself that she didn't do that in the very beginning.
Fall back!
Ulrich shouted as he blocked 2 corrupted at the same time. He noticed that they became the easiest targets in the group since they weren't protected by the barrier. They safely retreated and entered the barrier, but unfortunately, a handful of Templars couldn't make it and were being devoured by the corrupted like meat at a feast. Everyone was inside the barrier and looked at the hundreds of corrupted around them. They noticed that something wasn't right because it felt like the corrupted had been waiting for them. The numbers are growing. Archelaus noticed there were more of corrupted hidden deep in the forest. This isn't a coincidence, we are being ambushed by them and someone or something did this, he added. A few corrupted pointed their decayed hands at the barrier and something formed on their palms. Dark purple fireballs were formed and then released at the barrier at full speed. The barrier took those fireballs and damaged the barrier severely. Lennon reinforced the barrier and made sure those balls couldn't break the barrier. We are stuck here, Lennon said as she spread her arms, reinforcing the barrier. Where's Lady Sonia? Morrigan realized that Sonia wasn't in the barrier or outside the barrier. Everyone looked around them to find Sonia, but they couldn't see her anywhere. Suddenly someone landed on top of the barrier, and it made everyone look up. That was when they saw Sonia taunting the corrupted to target her instead. When I say run, you run and follow the road. We are close to the city and with my sisters around, this problem will be solved immediately, Sonia said as she counted the corrupted that ambushed them.
Get ready, she warned.
Sonia raised her hands and the ground was shaking heavily that everyone lost their footing and fell. The ground in the forest cracked open and roots suddenly impaled and strangled all the corrupted in a matter of a second. She then pushed her hand down, and the roots immediately dragged all the corrupted into the ground, buried by nature.
Now! Sonia shouted.
Lennon removed the barrier and everyone immediately ran and followed the road as Sonia wanted them to do. Novia looked back and noticed that Sonia used the branches to collect the fallen soldiers and buried them deep in the ground. She never expected that Sonia would care about the dead, knowing her personality. Your Holinesses, please get on Lady Sonia's horse. Thalia pointed at Sonia's horse. Morrigan and Astrea looked at Sonia because they didn't want to do it without her permission.
Go! Sonia shouted.
Astrea and Morrigan climbed on Sonia's horse and followed the others who were ahead of them. How far are we from the city? Calistair asked Archelaus, who was running at the front since he still had the responsibility to guide and be the first to fall if something bad happened to the group.
We are close.
We should be able to see the city wall very soon, Archelaus answered as he put his map away and looked at his surroundings back and forth, making sure there was no corrupted waiting for them. Lennon looked at the long straight road ahead of her, and she initiated by releasing a spell. She created 2 massive walls made of stone on the sides of the road to prevent an ambush. She then connected the 2 walls on top and it became a tunnel to protect them. It helped everyone feel at ease and made Archelaus' job a lot easier at the same time. I don't see Lady Sonia. Astrea looked back at the empty road. She can handle herself, Morrigan responded as she focused on controlling the horse. Our priority is to reach the city. When we arrive, I want everyone to prepare for the worst. She warned everyone around her. Everyone ran with all their might as they checked the ring of mana that Lennon had given them. They wanted to make sure they were ready at any time if something happened once they arrived at the city. I see the city wall. Archelaus shouted with a smile on his face. It's on fire. His smile disappeared when he saw a blazing fire in the city with thick black smoke going up to the sky.
That's a good sign.
That means Lady Sonia's sisters are still there. Be prepared because they might need our help. Arthur responded as he unsheathed his greatsword from his back. Everyone could see the city was on fire as Archelaus said earlier. They could see the entrance and saw someone was standing there. They could tell immediately that the person was Sonia because of her silver-braided hair and the long black robe that she wore. They were confused by how fast she reached the city even though she stayed behind to fight the corrupted.
Lady Sonia,
Archelaus said when he was close enough to Sonia. Sonia suddenly lifted her right index finger, telling everyone to not make any loud noises. Everyone stopped running and began to walk quietly because they wondered what made Sonia stand there quietly and keep her eyes on the front. Everyone stood behind Sonia and looked inside the city because they were curious about what she was seeing. They noticed the city was in ruins, and they could tell that the damage was done recently or even fresh. After they were done checking the scene, they saw someone standing in the distance. A woman with silver hair in black full-plate armor standing still surrounded by fire with her massive long sword that was as tall as her, stabbed to the ground. She was staring at them with a cold and sharp gaze filled with hatred and anger. Follow me quietly, Sonia said quietly and began to walk toward the silver-haired woman. Is she your sister, Lady Sonia? Novia asked quietly. Yes, so be quiet, Sonia answered coldly as she kept making eye contact with her sister who was glaring at her. As soon as they were close enough to see Sonia's sister's face clearly, Astrea, Lennon, Thalia, Archelaus, Ulrich, and Esper were terrified. The others could see their scared expressions with their eyes wide open when they looked at the woman's face. Master. Novia looked at Lennon who was scared. Lennon didn't say a word, but her hands were clenched as she gathered mana from her surroundings stealthily. Novia, who saw that, made her even more disturbed by her master's sudden change in her behavior. The answer to that was because it reminded Lenin and the others of the scene when Aristoria destroyed the Rufina's capital city. "Where's Illidan, Eris?" Sonia kept staring at her sister.
Is she gone?
She asked, and yet she didn't show any sadness on her face. "It would be great if she's dead, but her fate is far worse than death," Eris answered coldly with her deep and yet soft voice. "What took you so long to get here, Sonia?" She slowly raised her eyebrows, still with a dead stare toward her sister.
Worse than death?
"Who's powerful enough to defeat her?" Sonia asked back. "That's exactly why I asked what took you so long to get here, Sonia." Eris began to clench her right fist tightly on the handle of her long sword.
Oh, I see.
"These humans were dragging you down, weren't they?" Her eyes slowly stared at the groups behind Sonia as she pulled her sword from the ground. Especially those two religious women. She began to walk as she dragged her massive sword and stared directly at Astria and Morrigan. Sonia didn't say a word. Her silence was enough to answer Eris' question that they were indeed dragging her down and that caused her sister's demise. Eris had no more questions and walked toward the group.
Aristoria.
Sonia grabbed Eris' left arm when Eris was about to walk past her. "We don't have time for this," she warned. Her eyes were glaring at Eris. Eris glared back at Sonia and in a blink of an eye stabbed Sonia's chest with the back of the sword's handle. Sonia was sent flying and landed so far away from the group. Everyone who witnessed it couldn't see the attack at all, even though they were watching her.
Aristoria.
Astria's pupils were shaken and her hands began to tremble in fear. Everyone couldn't believe what they heard when Sonia said her sister's name. Lenin immediately created multiple mana barriers, creating layers of barriers. The other began to grab their weapons and readied their stances. Eris, who saw the barriers, suddenly raised her right brow and smirked coldly at them. She lifted her sword up into the sky and swung it down quickly. It was so fast that the air was cut and created a shockwave toward them. The moment the shockwave hit the barriers, they all shattered into pieces instantly. Lenin was in disbelief because those barriers that she created could endure her own strongest spell that she had invented. Eris dashed forward as she prepared to swing her sword at Astria and Morrigan. Artha, Calistair, Ulrich, Esper, Nyer Aluka, and Thalier charged at her and swung their swords to block her. They drained all the mana in the ring and turned them into aura because they knew that the woman in front of them was too powerful for them. Eris' sword was so long that it could clash with the 7 swords of the few strongest people in Neva. Unfortunately, the moment they clashed their swords with Eris' sword, they were sent flying before Archelaus and the Templars could prepare an attack on her. Eris swung her sword toward Astria and Morrigan, but Lenin released lightning bolts toward her while Novia prepared a magic circle to bind Eris' movements. When the lightning bolt struck Eris, her silver hair rose like a blooming white rose, and the scariest part was the fact she was unaffected by that spell. Novia activated the magic circle and bound Eris' movements, but it only lasted for a mere second because she could easily break the spell off. Although it was short, it was enough for the Templars to attack her from all directions. Unfortunately, when they swung their weapons at Eris' armor, their swords shattered. Eris stomped her right foot and it was enough to lift all the Templars from the ground. She swung her sword at those Templars, cutting their bodies in half. At that moment, they realized it was impossible to stop her from killing Astria and Morrigan. Eris thrust her sword and pointed it at Astria and Morrigan, but suddenly Sonia landed right in front of the tip of the blade. Eris immediately redirected her sword away from Sonia's face and stopped right next to Sonia's left cheek. The wind that she produced from thrusting the sword was so sharp it cut Sonia's cheek deeply.
Eris.
Sonia slowly put her left hand on the blade as she stared into Eris' eyes.
Where's Illidan?
Where is she? She furrowed, still disturbed by the fact Illidan could be defeated by someone or something. As I said, you were late. Eris slowly lowered her sword. They took her away, she answered reluctantly because she was still furious at the fact Sonia didn't come to help them in time.
Who are they?
Sonia squinted as she slowly closed the gap between her and Eris. I'll show you who are they, Eris said as she turned around. We don't have much time, so if you want to know, come. If you don't, you should leave this place immediately, she warned as she walked toward the heart of the city. Eris led Sonia deeper into the ruined city, and since the others didn't want to be left behind, they had no choice but to follow. The debris that was scattered on the ground was a sign of a great or even a terrifying battle between powerful beings, and one of them was Eris and Illidan. This architecture is from 20 generations ago when magic hasn't been developed yet, Novia said as she looked at the old buildings. So this place hasn't been touched by living beings for at least 400 years.
She pointed out.
Nobody said anything and only listened to Novia's observation because everyone was still shocked by what had just happened. Everyone was drained from that short fight with Eris both mentally and physically, even though they only clashed with her once. Novia noticed everyone was being too quiet, and she knew that nobody would answer her questions in her head. She decided to stay quiet because everyone was on the edge, especially her mentor Lenin, who had been keeping an eye on Eris the whole time. When they reached the crossroads, they finally saw the answer to the destruction of the city. They saw hundreds of dead corrupted scattered on the ground, roofs, and balconies. They could see more of them in the distance in each direction. In total, there might be at least 1,000 of them, scattered in the city. Eris stopped and pointed at a small pile of dead bodies near the old fountain. The bodies wore black robes with rope belts at their waists. Their faces were hidden beneath a black wooden mask with an eerie motive on it.
The Dark Priests.
How many were they? Sonia asked as she approached the pile. Dozens of them, and each of them brought at least 100 strong corrupted, Eris answered as she stabbed her sword into the ground. But they weren't the ones who took Illidan. They were similar to the Dark Priests, but they were a lot stronger. She watched as Sonia removed the mask of a Dark Priest, a decayed face that almost half of it had turned into a skull. So you both were busy killing these things and Illidan got taken away. Sonia understood the situation. Thankfully it was her and not you, Eris. She stood up and turned around to look at Eris. Suddenly, the sound of fire that filled the atmosphere was silenced. The sea of fire that swallowed the whole city suddenly got extinguished. The bright red view disappeared and was replaced by the red moonlight as red as blood. The heat from the flames was replaced by bone-chilling cold, followed by the thick mist that crawled into the city. Everything happened in less than a minute and the night became eerily quiet. Lenin, who had experienced the danger of the mist, immediately created a magic circle and released a strong gust of wind to send the mist away. The mist was pushed out of the city, but it came back and regained its position in a mere second, as if the mist was a supernatural phenomenon. It's too late to leave now, Eris said as she crossed her arms and stared menacingly at something in front of her. They were the ones who took Illidan. She pointed her finger at the distance in front of her. Sonia stared in the same direction as Eris because she also felt the presence that had just entered the city. She was disturbed by the unfamiliar aura that those presences had, and the fact that they were powerful beings that could be on par with her power. Everyone watched a total of 13 silhouettes behind the mist walk toward them. They readied their stances with the spare mana ring in their fingers, ready to confront whatever was going to happen. The beings walked out of the mist and stood still as they stared at the group with their glowing red eyes. Those beings wore either red, white, or gold-hooded robes with gold engravings on them with a lot of ornaments. They all wore the same white porcelain mask with eerie gold engravings. Those beings slowly moved to the sides and revealed the black-haired woman in an all-black dress and a hood to hide her messy hair. The woman stared at them with her glowing red eyes and pale face. She menacingly stared at the group as her hands reached out to her cheeks and scratched them with her long black nails. That's Hermione, that's the missing girl, Morrigan pointed out since she remembered the description of the missing girl. She's the third saint, the false prophet, she was confident with her guess. Then if we kill her, we will prevent the end of the world. Calistair held the sword tightly as he coated it with aura. Eris scoffed as she glanced at the group behind her with a mocking smile on her snow-white skin. It's a lot easier to look behind your eyes than kill her. You have no idea what kind of situation you're in, she stared at Hermione as she grabbed her sword and then pulled it out. Lenin created 4 magic circles simultaneously and pointed her right hand at the sky. The moment she clenched her fist, the 4th shattered and dark clouds slowly formed. The 3rd circle shattered and created a hurricane that blew the mist around the group. The 2nd circle shattered and balls of flame appeared in the sky, circling and following the hurricane. The last circle shattered and the balls of fire exploded, turning into a massive fire tornado that grew bigger as the air fed the flames. The fire tornado destroyed and melted everything it touched. Everyone witnessed the power of the great sage that could destroy a city with a single spell. The masked beings and Hermione didn't take any action, only staring at the fire tornado that Lenin had made. Suddenly one of them, a being in a red robe, pointed its right hand at the tornado that was approaching. The being swung its hand to the right and made the fire tornado disappear in an instant. Lenin didn't have time to be surprised by what had just happened and immediately created 12 magic circles. When she was about to release the spell, all the magic circles were destroyed. This time she couldn't help but be shocked by what she witnessed. They manipulate mana. Lenin was in disbelief as she looked at her hand. As soon as Lenin said that, one of the masked beings walked to the front with its hand pointed at the group. The being clenched its hand and suddenly the mana rings that everyone wore exploded into pieces, releasing the mana and turning it to waste. At that moment the group realized they were in the presence of the most dangerous opponent they had ever encountered. What did I tell you? It's easier to look the back of your eyes than killing that woman, Eris said without bothering to look back at the group. Don't be too surprised because that's not the only thing they could do. She clenched her sword and swung it around, releasing a gust of wind on each swing. Armaine looked at the dead corrupted that were scattered in the city. She slowly pressed her hands together like she was going to pray. A bright divine light appeared behind her back and blinded the group. The moment the light disappeared, there was a dark purple smoke descending from the sky. The smoke sipped into the bodies of the corrupted, and all the corpses began to twitch and open their eyes. The being in a gold robe spread its arms and suddenly the city was isolated by a black barrier like a dome. Lennon looked at the amount of mana in the air. They were decreasing and turning into demonic energy. That process made the corrupted in the city grow stronger. That's impossible. Astria's eyes were shaken when Armaine could use divine power. Not only that, Armaine could bring back the dead with it. God, please protect us all from evil. Her voice trembled in fear as she closed her eyes. Your God has forsaken this place. I don't believe your God can help you at all because we are nowhere near the grace of your God, Sonia said as she watched the corrupted rise from the dead and glared at them. Everyone looked around and there was nowhere for them to run because the corrupted had surrounded them. The number of corrupted increased as time flew by, but none of them were attacking the group. They only stood there and glared at the group with their wide-open eyes and decayed faces as if they were waiting for an order. It only made the group anxious because they didn't know when those corrupted were going to attack them. Did we not warn you to leave? A deep hoarse voice echoed. We gave you a chance, but you wasted it, another deep hoarse voice added. You'll regret your decision by staying, a different deep hoarse voice said. Eris swung her sword with all her might horizontally. The shockwave was enough to decapitate and incapacitate all the corrupted in her vision in a matter of a second. She swung her sword and dashed toward the masked beings on her own. If you want to live, fight and create a path for us to run. Sonia's voice was barely above a whisper as she stared at Armaine coldly. Use everything you got and fight for your life because this is the only chance we got, she added as she began to float and watched Eris distract all those masked beings. Morrigan and Astria pressed her hands together and a divine light appeared above their heads. The light spread and cleansed the demonic energy around them. Since demonic energy was basically mana that got corrupted, the cleansed demonic energy became mana again. Lennon didn't waste the opportunity and began to fly up high into the sky. Arrows were shot at her, but the mana barrier she put around her body was enough to deflect them all. She began to cast 7 magic circles around her. Novia noticed that those magic circles were the ones that Rasmus had invented. Novia didn't want to stay put and decided to do the same thing as Lennon did. They both released the lightning bolts and struck them down, ripping and disintegrating everything they touched. Dozens of corrupted turned into ashes in seconds and then hundreds. The two of them eliminated more than any swordmasters and northern stars combined. I owe you my life, Count Rasmus. Lennon said as she looked down at the thousands of corrupted surrounding the group, which had turned into crisp and ashes. Artha and the others began to create a path for them to leave the city. They showed what they were capable of and fought the corrupted. They didn't hold back at all and used everything they had to survive. The amount of mana is thinning, we must leave as soon as possible. Lennon warned the group that it was busy opening a path.
Novia, protect the saints.
They're the only ones who can turn demonic energy back to mana with their divine power. She looked down at Novia, who kept using the spell to disintegrate the corrupted. Novia descended and hurriedly stood by Astria and Morrigan on their side to protect them. She created a magic formation, creating a powerful barrier to protect the saints that centered on her. No need to panic. You're not alone. Sonia ascended and floated behind Lennon, staring down at the group and opening a path with her calm expression. Lennon turned around and saw Sonia's hands above her head. The whole city trembled and Lennon saw the city walls collapsing by the roots beneath the city. Once again, Lennon noticed that Sonia's ability didn't require a lot of mana, which made her curious about how it was possible. Sonia's ears perked up like a cat's and immediately clapped her hands. A barrier made of roots emerged from the ground and went all the way up, creating a natural wall. Suddenly the thick and tough roots that had entangled together got cut in half by a shockwave coming from where Eris was. The roots will prevent the remaining corrupted from entering the city, but I'm not sure how long they will last. Use the time you have to escape. My sister needs me. Sonia stared at Lennon with a serious expression and descended to join the fight with Eris. Morrigan prayed with her hands closed together as balls of light manifested from thin air. The balls merged into one, becoming one massive ball of light. She began to sweat and her face became pale as she kept praying. Lady Novia, protect Lady Morrigan. She's the key to our survival. Don't think about me, Astra's eyes darkened and turned cold as she watched her Templars and the others struggling to open a path because of how strong and skilled the corrupted were. I have people to protect. Right now, my role is insignificant to Morrigan, and I have to do everything I can to protect them rather than being protected, she added as she walked to the front to assist the group. Novia nodded as she began to create a massive magic circle on the ground around Morrigan. She was too inexperienced to take the initiative, so she did her best to follow the order instead. Aluka and Nyer were ahead of the others because they were the strongest. They proved themselves as the northern white stars as they moved simultaneously, making it impossible for any corrupted to find an opening to attack.
Sir Aluka. Dame Nyer.
Garcia shouted as she threw 2 vials at them. Aluka glanced at the flying vials and immediately caught them while Nyer dealt with the corrupted. He looked at the silver substance like water inside the vials with his eyes narrowed and brows furrowed. They're potions that will boost your strength for at least 10 minutes. It has a huge drawback, so drink it when you think it's the right time. Garcia clenched her fists, hoping that the potions would help everyone escape. Give me the potion, Nyer said as she stabbed a corrupted right in the chest and pierced the dark purple crystal inside it. Aluka tossed the potion at Nyer, and he didn't expect her to drink it immediately. Seeing her sister drink the potion, he did the same because there was no time for hesitation. Their hearts felt like being squeezed out for a split second, leaving immense pain throughout their veins. The effect of the potion was felt immediately where their bodies felt so light and numb at the same time as if they could break a mountain with their fists. They both swung their swords as hard as they could with the powerful aura around the blades. The shockwaves were so powerful that they cut the corrupted a few meters in front of them in half. They both were surprised by the power they produced and remembering what Garcia said, they only had 10 minutes. Those potions, did you bring one for everyone, Lady Garcia?
Astria asked.
Yes, but I'm not going to give it to them now. I'm planning to give 2 potions every 10 minutes to prevent everyone from falling because of the drawback. Garcia nodded as she watched the Templars who might need the potion. Lady Cecilia has the antidote to lessen the drawback, so everything is under control, Your Holiness, she assured. Astria stared at the bag that Garcia carried, intrigued by the potions that she had made. She looked over to Nyer and Aluka at the front with immense power. She had never seen anything like that and she knew that those 2 were holding back to reserve their stamina. She didn't have time to be amazed and continued to support her Templars.
Your Holiness.
Novia shouted as soon as she saw Morrigan collapse and pass out. Astria turned around and looked at the massive ball of divine energy. She chuckled as she shook her head in disbelief and walked toward it.
Her job is done.
It's time for me to do the rest. Astria pressed her hands together below the ball of divine energy. The ball of divine energy exploded and the blast cleaned the demonic energy in the whole city. Most of the corrupted collapsed and lost their lives when they got exposed to it, the remaining ones got weakened. The masked beings hissed as they were exposed by the blast, blocking the blinding light with their arms. Eris and Sonya used the opportunity to attack the masked beings. Sonya pointed her hands at Eris's sword and coated the blade with a dense mana. The mana was so dense that it glowed and could be seen with the naked eye. A glowing yellow color like the sun coated the blade. Armaine looked at the dense mana around Eris's blade and knew that it wasn't just mana but something that was purer than mana. What is that?
Armaine was shocked.
We can't stop it, she yelled as her eyes trembled in fear. Eris swung her sword and when it was about to release the power, the whole city turned pitch black for a moment. She noticed someone or something had stopped her sword and when the darkness disappeared, a smooth pale hand with its index finger and thumb pinched the blade. Now. A deep and low of a woman's voice said under her breath.
Aren't you a special one?
Perhaps they took the wrong one. She grinned with her eyes barely opened and her glowing red eyes were like a blazing furnace. Sonya and Eris narrowed their eyes when they realized the woman in front of them wasn't from this world. The woman flicked the blade and it was enough to send Eris flying, but thankfully Sonya was there to catch her. They both fell to their knees as they looked at the tall woman with skin as pale as ash. There were cracks on the woman's skin that emitted dark red light. The woman looked at the threads of light hovering above the city. She wasn't affected by divine light, not even a burn on her skin. She slowly walked toward Sonya and Eris, her hips swaying alluringly. This is no fun. The woman pouted as she crossed her arms and shifted her weight on her left foot.
Fun.
Sonya narrowed her eyes, her voice a bit shaky from both anxiety and irritation. The woman grinned as she looked down at Sonya and Eris. Yes, I don't like playing an easy game like this. Sonya and Eris were about to attack the woman that was right in front of them. When they were about to move their muscles, the woman shushed them into their ears even though she was right in front of them. It gave them chills down their spines as they lost control of their bodies, making them unable to move a muscle. Be a good girl. The woman giggled softly. The woman lifted her head and stared at the strings of divine light. She blew an air out of her mouth and the overwhelming divine energy immediately dispersed and disappeared into thin air. At that moment, Astrea and the others stayed still as their heads lifted when the light disappeared. They slowly turned around to see who was powerful enough to disperse the power of gods. They saw Sonia and Eris on their knees, completely defeated, and there was a person in front of those two. Everyone was shocked by what they witnessed. What made it interesting was the fact that each individual saw the person differently. Some saw the woman as a man, some saw the woman as another woman with a completely different appearance. Nobody saw the woman the same way, including Eris and Sonia, but they didn't know that, at least not yet.
Who is he?
Astrea muttered as her eyes focused on the man who stood in front of Sonia and Eris.
He?
That's a woman. Lennon furrowed her brows as she turned her head to look at Astrea. No, master, that's definitely a man. Novia looked at Lennon with a confused look. He's big and muscular with short black hair. There's no woman trait in him. She described the man she saw. What are you talking about? She's a woman and she has long brown hair. Lennon looked at Novia weirdly. At that moment, they realized the person they were looking at was different from each other. No magic can do something like that. Morrigan muttered weakly as she tried to stand up with Novia's help. That person. No, I should say a being in front of Sonia and Eris isn't human. She pointed out as her eyes never left the skinny man in front of Sonia and Eris. Lennon, who was a great sage, agreed to Morrigan's words. Nobody in Neva could use such an illusion spell that made everyone see the caster's appearance differently. Another thing that made her anxious was the fact that the being hid its power and made her unable to see its mana.
A demon.
Artha's voice trembled when he asked the question. Not just an ordinary demon. If a normal demon is similar to a peasant, then that being over there can be a duke or above in the hierarchy. Astrea pointed out as her knees felt weak from fear. Everyone stood there as if they were frozen in time, thinking and processing everything. What should we do? Novia broke the silence as she looked at everyone. Everyone wanted to run away, leaving Sonia and Eris alone because they knew they were no match against that powerful being. They couldn't utter their thoughts because they knew it wasn't the right thing to do when humankind was at stake. The being swirled their fingers and in an instant, everyone was gathered at the center of the city, surrounded by the masked beings, Ermaine, and the powerful being. Everyone panicked and immediately raised their weapons, but then gravity pushed them all to the ground, and they couldn't even lift their heads. Ho! The powerful being looked at Aristoria, who was on one knee, using her sword to support her body against gravity. What are you? Sonia asked as she went on all four, trying to get up. We have never heard anything about you.
Of course you don't.
I came down here just recently, and this world is going to be mine. The being chuckled mischievously. But I want some challenges, so I'm going to propose something to all of you. The being reduced the pressure and allowed them to lift their heads to look at them. Once they lifted their heads, it was the first time they saw the being's real appearance. A disfigured face with a tall body that looked like it was burned, and lastly the silhouette of its wings that could cover the whole city. As soon as Aristoria could move her whole body, her pupils shrunk and emitted a faint light blue light from her eyes. The being looked at it for a moment and felt a bit threatened by what she was trying to do. Before she could lift her sword, Sonia wrapped her arms around Aristoria's neck, pulling her down.
Don't.
Sonia grunted at Aristoria. Don't do it. She muttered softly into Aristoria's ear as she hugged her so tightly. The being looked down at those two and then looked at the rest of them. Anyway, what was I saying? The being tilted its head. Right, a proposal. Why don't we call it a day and we go on our way?
The being proposed.
Everyone was baffled by the proposal that the powerful being had offered. They were speechless and didn't know what to say or even think from that.
What do you mean?
Sonia asked as she stared at the being with a cold expression. I'm too weak right now, the powerful being pointed out. So, I'm planning to send my children over here to deceive and bring humankind astray. With that, it will help me grow stronger. So, we can play this fun game together later. Why would we do that? I would rather die here and fight you to the death. Novia shouted at the powerful being, her eyes wide and menacing. Lennon immediately covered Novia's mouth and pulled her closer. Novia was shocked and in disbelief when Lennon didn't agree with her at all. She then looked at the others and she was taken aback when everyone considered the proposal. Youngsters are always so brave to the point they're being foolish, the being chuckled. Little lady, do you think by fighting us right now, the rest can protect this world from us? Are you sure you want to waste your life here and make humankind vulnerable?
We take it,
Sonia said with a serious expression. We take that offer, she added as she held Aristoria so tightly because Aristoria didn't agree. She had to use a mana bind to immobilize Aristoria completely.
Perfect,
The powerful being said as it changed its appearance into a beautiful woman with silver hair in a black beautiful tight dress. You may go now. She smiled gently and lifted the pressure she had put on them. What about Ildan? Sonia asked as she stood up, keeping Aristoria close to her.
Illidan?
Oh, you mean your other sister? The woman said as she turned around. Come here, my beautiful servant.
She beckoned at someone.
Everyone saw a silhouette in the mist as they all stood up. When the figure came out of the mist, both Aristoria and Sonia were shocked when they saw Illidan's appearance. Her skin was like ash, her eyes were glowing red, and her ears became long and pointy. The Illidan they knew was no longer there, the body had been possessed by something else. Aristoria glared at the woman and it was enough to tell that she was extremely furious, but unfortunately, she couldn't even move her body or even open her mouth. She tried her best to break free from the bind, but then the whole ground trembled. She glanced at Sonia and she had never seen Sonia making a furious expression before. Lenin and Novia saw the trace of faint blue light around Sonia. It was similar to mana but it was different, and they couldn't tell what it was. For Lenin, she could smell it, and the scent was something she had never smelled before. Now, didn't you agree to the proposal? The woman tilted her head, staring at Sonia with a mischievous smile. Just so you know, her soul is no longer in that body. She's no longer your sister, Sonia, she pointed out with a smirk on her face. Sonia unclenched her fists, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She slowly nodded her head with understanding and fluttered her eyes open. Until we meet again, the woman waved her hand at them as her mane and the masked beings stood behind her. The mist thickened, leaving only a small space that was uncovered by it, which was where Sonia and the others were. The moment the mist disappeared, the woman, Ermaine, the masked beings, and all the corrupted disappeared without a trace.
Let's leave.
We have a lot of things to discuss, Sonia said as she turned around and looked at the others. Their journey back to the Arzeden fortress was quiet and awkward because they were utterly defeated. They felt immense shame within them for being unable to live up to their names and titles. Their failure was going to bite them back in the future, more painful than they could imagine. Novia slowly turned her head to look over her shoulder where Sonia rode her horse with Aristoria on her back. She couldn't believe that Sonia hadn't released her spell on Aristoria, which made Aristoria look like a statue. The knights opened the gate into the fortress when Morrigan and the others were close to the gate. The knights that were on the wall were looking down and noticed that there were fewer of them compared to when they left the fortress. They wondered what happened and what did they fight out there that cost so many lives, not to mention the lives of Templars. It has been a long day. Let everyone rest and clean themselves first before we discuss this matter, Sonia said as she looked down at Morrigan and the others. Let's meet in an hour, she pointed out as she jumped down from her horse and used mana to lift Aristoria's body. Everyone nodded in agreement, but when they were about to go their separate ways, they heard the sound of armor hitting the ground. When they turned around, they saw Aristoria had broken free from the bind, which surprised Sonia. You're useless. Aristoria threw a powerful punch right into Sonia's gut. Sonia was thrown away like a rock onto the wall of the fortress. She hit the wall so hard that it made big cracks in it, and when she slid down, the wall crumbled. Everyone knew they stood no chance of stopping the affair of the sisters. You were supposed to end this once and for all. Aristoria shouted her lungs out as she grabbed her sword from the horse's saddle. We were supposed to kill that being, she added as she walked toward Sonia's weakened body. Sonia groaned as she tried to stand up by using the wall to support her back. Her gaze was cold when she stared at Aristoria, but she didn't do anything else to stop Aristoria from advancing. We could, but do we want to lose another Aristoria? Sonia asked as she leaned her head against the wall. I would trade mankind for the safety of an Aristoria, she pointed out. Everyone listened to their conversation, confused and curious by Sonia's words. What did she mean by another Aristoria? Was it not a name, or was it something else that only Orpheus knew? And the fact Sonia would trade mankind for it, they thought how special an Aristoria was. Aristoria didn't plan to listen and she immediately swung her sword toward Sonia. Sonia, who could see the intention to kill from Aristoria's eyes, immediately dodged it and she barely dodged the sword. Aristoria's attack was enough to break the wall of the fortress and slowly the wall crumbled. The knights that were on top of the wall began to run for their lives as the wall collapsed, the wall that was supposed to withstand dozens of boulders from catapults. Unfortunately, Some couldn't run fast enough and fell, burying themselves in the rubble of the wall.
Aristoria.
Are you out of your mind? Sonia shouted at Aristoria, glaring at her in disbelief. There are a lot of you, but none of me. Aristoria said coldly as she lifted her sword and turned around. You're replaceable, Sonia. She pointed as she began to walk towards Sonia again. Sonia knew she didn't want to hurt Aristoria, and she knew that she couldn't stop Aristoria since she was no match for her. If you kill me, the elders won't stay quiet, Aristoria. Do you think you're special? Sonia gritted her teeth, staring coldly at Aristoria. You're replaceable, just like me.
There will always be an Aristoria, she pointed out.
Aristoria stopped moving and stared at Sonia with a cold gaze. She slowly raised her brows and a smirk formed on her face. Good, then I don't have a reason to stay here with you anymore since you can nurture a new one, Aristoria said and began to walk toward the gate to fight those demons. If you're not one of us, you don't have the right to wield that sword and wear that armor, Eris, Sonia pointed out as she clenched her fists, holding her anger. Aristoria glanced at Sonia and scoffed as she unbelted her pauldrons. The pauldrons and the cape fell to the ground, revealing her pale and smooth shoulders. She unbelted her breastplate and placard and revealed her toned and muscular back, leaving only a cloth that wrapped around her chest. She began to drop all the armor off her body while everyone was watching in disbelief. Lastly, she threw the massive longsword and landed right in front of Sonia. They're holding me back anyway, Aristoria said before she began to walk toward the gate. Lennon thought for a moment and found this whole situation a massive problem. She knew she had to stop Aristoria because if she ended up becoming another servant for that powerful being. She didn't know why an Aristoria was special, but she knew that it would be dangerous to let her become an enemy. Rasmus Blackheart. Lennon shouted at Aristoria. Everyone looked at Lennon with a confused and surprised look when she mentioned the Blackheart family. Astria, Morrigaine, Novia, and Sonia looked at her because they knew Rasmus, and why did she mention him? On the other hand, Aristoria turned around to look at Lennon with her brows furrowed. I don't know who that person is, Aristoria said before she continued to walk away. I don't know how you share the same name as Aristoria Blackheart, but that name I gave you is the son of Aristoria Blackheart, an Orpheus. Lennon explained nervously. Aristoria slowly turned around, her brows furrowed with a confused look. She glanced at Sonia for confirmation, and then Sonia nodded her head, telling her that it wasn't a lie.
A mix.
Aristoria tilted her head, her eyes never leaving Sonia's eyes.
That's not possible, she narrowed her eyes.
It's not, but it happened, Sonia nodded in agreement. I have seen him with my own 2 eyes.
He's different, Eris, she pointed out.
I see that you're not interested in us, but if you're interested in Rasmus, I can bring you to him, Lennon said. Everyone understood what Lennon was trying to do, and they were hoping that it would work. They knew it would be dangerous for Aristoria to become their enemy, especially to be on the evil side. Aristoria gave it a thought for a moment because she knew about her predecessor, Aristoria Blackheart. She knew the story of how Aristoria Blackheart left and chose to disappear, abandoning her role. She also felt the same way as her predecessor because she didn't like being controlled by others knowing that she was superior to the other Orpheas. Where is he? Aristoria glanced at Lennon. He's staying in the magic tower. I can bring you to him, I promise, but I have to stay here for a moment since we have to discuss this matter. Can you wait, Lady Aristoria? Lennon asked, her expression being serious and nervous at the same time. Fine, I'll wait. Aristoria crossed her arms as she nodded with understanding. Thank you, Lady Aristoria. Lennon bowed her head a bit. I'm no longer Aristoria, Aristoria said as she glanced at Sonia. I'm not an Aristoria anymore.
Just call me Eris, she pointed out.
Of course, Lady Eris, Lennon nodded with understanding. Sonia walked toward Eris as she removed her fur coat because the knights couldn't stop staring at Eris' barely naked body. She offered the fur coat to Eris, staring up at her with her stoic expression. Eris didn't hesitate to take the fur coat and place it over her shoulders. She didn't care about the cold since it didn't affect her, but being stared at was a bit annoying and disgusting. Are you sure about this, Eris? You don't want to reconsider your decision? Sonia asked in a soft and gentle voice. There was a hint of sadness in her voice. I will never take back my words, Sonia. Tell the elders that I'm not going to be their lackey anymore, Eris answered without hesitation and without regret in her eyes. Sonia lowered her head as she nodded with understanding. Please don't make the same mistake as your predecessor, Eris, Sonia muttered quietly. I won't. Eris stared down at Sonia with a serious expression. Looking at Sonia's scalp, Morrigan and Astria were already in the meeting room, waiting for the others. They both were anxious, but oddly they felt comfortable around each other for the first time because they both shared the same burden. There was only silence, a comfortable and yet heavy one. After waiting for a few minutes, Artha and the other came into the room, no longer in their armor. They walked toward the round table and sat wherever they liked. They no longer separated themselves from each other like back then. Artha was sitting beside Thalia and Calistair. Their conflicts and status no longer mattered when they all failed to stop the prophecy. When they were about to begin, Eris barged in and everyone was surprised when she cut her hair short. Sonia was expressionless, but her eyes were the opposite. She looked a bit sad when she saw Eris with that short hair. What? Eris crossed her arms and stared at all of them with a cold gaze menacingly. Everyone immediately looked away and some cleared their throats. Let's address this issue, Morrigan said, looking at everyone in the room. It's about the third saint, Ermaine. We saw with our eyes that she could use divine power that only the saints could have. This issue will cause an uproar, a third saint that appeared out of nowhere, she pointed out as she looked at Astrea. We heard from that demon. They plan to deceive humankind and lead them astray. Astrea paused, nervously playing with her nails. We can assume they will create their own religion. A religion that the demon worshippers have been waiting for their whole lives, a religion that will oppose morality and humanity. She continued as she clenched her fists. Everyone nodded in agreement. They knew the hidden agenda during the Great Era, and what it was actually about. I wanted to say that we should let the people know, giving them a warning. Thalia passed as he shook her head. But that would only bring chaos. The world isn't ready for the truth, and so are we. He said with a serious expression, his hands intertwined and his eyes focused on the spot on the table. At that moment, Lennon remembered what Rasmus had said to her, about the people who built the world with lies or hiding the truth. She remembered what he warned her about the world that was based on lies, it would crumble. She was terrified and amazed at the same time by how Rasmus could predict this future. His question was, which side I would choose, was it? The ones that built the world with lies or the truth seekers? Lennon closed her eyes, massaging her nose bridge. If you were me, what would you choose, Count? Novia could see the troubled expression that Lennon had, wondering what was on her mind. We should address if we even stand a chance, your holinesses, Archelaus pointed out as he looked at Astrea and Morrigan. They possess both divine power and evil power. We were powerless in the presence of that being. The people who sit here at this moment are the few strongest people in the whole Neva. I don't believe sending the rest of us will make any difference, he added with his brows furrowed, concerned and afraid. Everyone looked down, agreeing with Archelaus' words but too afraid to nod their heads. The room became silent for a moment until Lennon cleared her throat to break the silence. May I? Lennon looked at everyone. Please, great sage. Astrea's eyes brightened a bit, seeing Lennon had decided to speak. Lord Archelaus is concerned about whether we even stand a chance against them. My answer is, yes, we are, Lennon said with confidence as she looked at Archelaus. We have to understand that we were fighting them in a place that we weren't familiar with. Second, we were fighting in a place where mana was scarce and we relied only on the rings that I provided. We lost because we weren't prepared for it, she pointed out as she stared at them. Everyone nodded and realized her reasonings were valid and they hadn't thought about that beforehand. We were taken by surprise, and even if we were in the worst-case scenario, I know someone who can help us, Lennon pointed as she tapped her finger on the table. It's not someone that you all know, she added as she looked at them. Who is it, great sage? Thalia raised his brows, curious about this person that even the great sage could look up to. It's... Lennon paused. Count Rasmus Blackheart, she revealed. Everyone didn't expect the person that the great sage looked up to was Rasmus Blackheart. A young man unknown for his whereabouts for the past decade was the person she believed could help them. Nobody knew about his ability, but Lennon knew, and she experienced it beforehand, and with her own eyes. Novia was there as well when Lennon was bedridden because she was affected by his spell. Are you sure, great sage? He's just an instructor at Gratlin Academy. We never heard anything about his ability, and I think he's no match with you, great sage. Morrigan narrowed her eyes, not wanting to rely on Rasmus because she knew and had seen how dark his thoughts were. Trust me, your holiness. Count Rasmus Blackheart is more genius compared to me and all the mages and scholars combined, Lennon answered as she stared into Morrigan's eyes. Everyone couldn't believe it, their eyes were wide open and brows raised when she admitted that she was nothing compared to Rasmus. Unfortunately, there's one little problem, Lennon stacked her hands on the table. Count Rasmus Blackheart, he's dangerous. He has no desire to protect this world or destroy it. We have to understand that we killed his whole family in front of his eyes, and he hates us, she pointed out. That's nonsense, great sage. We can change his mind if we tell him the truth about what's happening right now. Ulrich crossed his arms, staring at Lenin with his brows furrowed. What kind of man that has no desire?
That's a lie, he added.
Morrigan placed her finger under her lips, thinking about her encounter with Rasmus. She had read the assignment that Monica did, and she thought about what Rasmus had said to her about Monica. She realized that Rasmus was a pragmatist, a person who sought nothing but benefits for himself, and yet he didn't have any strong desires. It was proven when he could withstand and endure Aurelia's power. No, Morrigan shook her head, denying Ulrich's words. The great sage is right. I have seen him in person. He was dangerous. Not because of what he could do, but because of his way of thinking. I'm not sure he would care about this situation, she explained, her eyes staring blankly at the table. Eris looked at Lenin and Morrigan, and she was interested in this man called Rasmus Blackheart. Her interest in him grew larger because she wanted to see him in person. The fact he hated them based on Lenin's words, and how he could care less about the situation, resonated with her. Let's just say that it's true that he doesn't care about this situation, Arthur said as he crossed his arms, his eyes scanning the faces around him. Why did you mention him in the first place, great sage? I know that you have a way to persuade him, right? Lenin took a deep breath and exhaled deeply, tilting her head slightly to think. She was unsure if she could bring Rasmus to their side, but she knew that he didn't like people who lied or hid the truth. I could try. I'll try everything, Lenin nodded as she looked at everyone in the room. We can let the great sage deal with that, and we should focus on the main issue here, Astria said as she sat straight. The new religion, what are we going to do with it and what move should we make? We have to find the solution right here, right now. She looked at the people in the room. Eris, who had heard enough, decided to leave the room because she didn't care at all. The future of Neva is in our hands, Esper muttered as he sighed. After a very long discussion and countless arguments, everyone was rubbing their faces, frustrated and completely at lost. They weren't bothered about letting the third saint and her religion, they were bothered by how much they had to sacrifice before they could eliminate her and her religion. If they began their first move from the north, it's unfair for them. We can't let Ermaine take over the north. Too many lives, too many warriors would be corrupted. We can't let that happen, Archelaus said with a troubled look. We can't let the north disappear. Artha, Aluka, and Nyer nodded in agreement and appreciated Archelaus for recognizing the problem. That being made a proposal to us because she said she was still weak. She needed followers to regain her power, so if we made a proposal to them, would they listen if we threaten them? The great sage mentioned that we could fight against them since they would be in our territory, so it should be enough to make them consider moving to another region rather than fighting us, right? Novia proposed as she looked at everyone in the room. They thought about it for a moment and considered Novia's idea. It wasn't a bad idea, but the question would be, which region they wanted to sacrifice. Central Neva was out of the option, which narrowed the choice to be eastern, western, or southern regions. Did we assume that powerful being to be that foolish to center their move in a single region? Artha looked at them with a serious expression, rubbing his beard as an act to comfort himself. The demon worshippers, they would rise all over Neva the moment they realize their lord has come to this world. It will spread all over Neva, brainwashing the people to follow them. Everyone rubbed their faces once again, realizing they had reached another wall. Right, and we have no idea if that powerful being with those masked beings could move undetected. We have seen the powerful being could change its appearance to its liking, and we wouldn't know if it had moved to another region or not by now, Thalier added as he clenched his fists on the table. We won't find the solution here, and we are wasting our time, Lenin said as she stood up, knowing that this whole discussion wouldn't reach any conclusions. It would be best if we tell the rest of the powerful figures about this matter. We need them all to decide what we will do about that being and the third saint. We have to hurry before we lose control over this world, she pointed out and looked at everyone. Everyone sighed and hated admitting that Lenin was right about it. They were only wasting their time, and the other powerful figures deserved to know. Let's meet up at the Council of Neva, 1 month from now, Lenin said with a serious expression. We don't have time to spare. Everyone nodded in agreement and decided to prepare to leave. But then Morrigan looked at Sonia, who had been oddly quiet the whole time since the beginning. Lady Sonia, what about you? Morrigan asked, and her question piqued everyone's interest. What are you going to do now? Sonia stared at all the figures around her before she decided to open her mouth. We agreed to help you deal with the prophecy, Morrigan. We don't care about the affairs of humankind, and we don't involve ourselves with you, all of you. This will be the end for now. Sonia stood up from her chair. Her words were like daggers that pierced everyone's hearts. They were shocked by how detached she was, but they realized it was humankind's fault to begin with. They didn't have the right to protest or demand anything from her. Would you help us if we failed? Morrigan asked with a soft voice. Her words hinted how much she was afraid and desperate. I have observed all of you from the very beginning. You have proven yourself that you're not the same as your ancestors. I will try my best to persuade the elders, and see how far we will involve ourselves, Sonia said coldly. I can assure you that this world will not fall under the evil power. Hearing that from Sonia, everyone unconsciously bowed their heads to her. She was taken aback by their actions, but her facial was as stiff and cold as always. Good luck to all of you, Sonia said before she walked away and left the room. The cold and chill wind with the snow hitting Sonia's face as soon as she left the castle inside the Arrestan fortress. She looked around and found Eris sitting on top of the rubble from the wall that she had destroyed earlier. She decided to approach her and climb up the rubble.
Eris.
Sonia stood behind Eris as her hands reached Eris's short hair and began to play with it. What? Eris didn't look back and allowed Sonia to play with her hair. Sonia didn't say anything and continued to play with Eris's hair. She could feel how smooth it was until she stopped her fingers when she saw a few faint light blue hairs on Eris's head. She had never seen anything like that before because all Orthias had silver hair. What? Eris asked again. This time she turned her head to look up at Sonia. It's nothing. Sonia shook her head, putting her cold and stiff expression. The meeting is over. I believe it's time for you to meet him, she said as she hid her hands behind her back with a strand of light blue hair that she pulled from Eris's head. Eris hummed as she stood up and walked past Sonia, going down the ruble. She didn't look back to look at Sonia as if she didn't care about her. Sonia didn't mind it because Orthias didn't get attached to each other like humans did. Lenin watched Thalier, Astria, Ulrich, Esper, and Archelaus prepare their belongings before they went to the capital with her. She glanced to her right and saw Eris walking toward her. She immediately nodded her head, telling Eris that they were about to leave. Do you have anything with you, Lady Eris? Lenin looked at Eris, the tallest woman she had ever met. She looked at Eris's clothes. They were meant for men's clothing, long pants, boots, and a long-sleeved shirt without tying the top part, revealing her collarbones. No, Eris answered with her arms crossed. We will be leaving soon, Lenin said as she nodded with understanding, placing her hands behind her back. At the same time on the ship, Rasmus and Videl walked up to the deck of the ship, cracking their necks and backs. They stood there for a moment for a breather and looked at the busy people around them. The smell of the sea. Videl said as he looked around and saw seagulls flying around the port. Welcome to the South Neva where sea, rivers, and lakes are everywhere. Rasmus nodded as he massaged his nape and looked at the vast sea around him. The journey was longer than I thought, not to mention we had to transit a few times. I'm surprised that you weren't complaining, he sighed as he pulled his hair back. Rasmus expected Videl would reply to his comment, but all he heard was silence. He glanced at Videl and he noticed the confused look on Videl's face. Before he could ask, he watched Videl turn around, facing north with his brows furrowed. What's wrong? Rasmus furrowed his brows and crossed his arms. Videl's eyes were focused on something in the distance and still hadn't opened his mouth. It made Rasmus more curious and decided to tap on Videl's shoulder. Videl was surprised and he immediately looked away and toward Rasmus. What is it? Rasmus raised his brows. I'm not sure. Videl paused as he took a glance at the spot he had stared at earlier. I felt something, a familiar presence coming from over there, he pointed at the distance. Something that I know very well. He muttered to himself. It's them, isn't it? Rasmus stared at the direction Videl was pointing at, knowing who they were from the way Videl described it. Satan. He glanced at Videl. Yes, and they're annoying loyal servants. Videl clenched his fists, his eyes cold. So it has begun. Rasmus hummed as he crossed his arms, eyes focused at the distance toward the north. Our contender. Contender, you say? Damn right. Videl's voice was cold until a smirk formed on his face. As soon as the ship docked, Rasmus and Videl got off the ship and looked at the beautiful city of Eden Villa in front of them. The hill with a palace on top, surrounded by forest, mountains and Georgian-era buildings was like paradise to Rasmus. Since they have made their moves, we can't let them have a head start, Rasmus said as he fixed his suit. We will start from here. Rasmus walked around the port city and watched hundreds of merchants load and unload goods from the ships. He wanted to explore the city and check how many trading companies existed in the city. He knew that he would be stared at since he wore unique attire, not to mention his white hair. He could hear people murmuring and whispering using wind magic that manipulated the wind to move around him. He could hear even the quietest whisper with that. He could hear that he had become well known because of the incident that happened in the academy between him and the Sherm family. "You're famous now, huh?" Vidal chuckled after he listened to the murmurs and whispers. Although he had lost all of his powers, his senses were still sharper than any human. His strength was still inhuman, but not as strong as he used to be. In fact, he only possessed 10% of his original strength, and yet Rasmus still couldn't touch him. "I told you it would help me," Rasmus responded as he pulled out a piece of paper that Garrett had given him. It was the location where his brother lived. "His house should be around here somewhere," he pointed out as he looked around the street. Rasmus looked at the busy street where dozens of carriages and wagons passed him every minute. He knew he went to the right place where information would be easily obtained when people from all over the world came to this place to trade. "That should be the place." Rasmus pointed at the house with the big and grandiose shiny gate across the street. Vidal whistled as he raised his brows when he looked at the big mansion with a garden and fountains behind the wall and gate. They crossed the street and stood in front of the gate, and luckily there was a servant who was watering the plants. The servant noticed them and immediately put down the watering can in his hand. "May I help you?" the servant asked as he looked at Rasmus and Vidal back and forth. "Is Lord Carrion home?" Rasmus asked as he pulled out a letter. "This should be enough reason why I'm looking for him," he pointed out and gave the letter to the servant. The servant looked at the letter, but he didn't have the right to read it. He told Rasmus to wait and then hurriedly walked back into the mansion to give the letter to the butler. It didn't take a minute when Rasmus saw an old man walking hurriedly along with the servant out of the mansion. The old man looked panicked after he read the letter and he told the servant to open the gate. "My apologies, Count Blackheart. Please come in," the butler said as he bowed his head. "No need to apologize. You did what you were told," Rasmus nodded. The butler and the servant were confused because they didn't see any luggage that they could carry. They couldn't believe that someone from Central Neva didn't have any belongings with him. When they entered the mansion, the first thing that Rasmus saw was that the mirror was being replaced. He could see the fragments of a mirror on the floor that the maids were trying to collect. He then looked at the vases and some of them looked new compared to the rest. He also saw the cabinet filled with bottles of alcohol and almost all of them were empty. "Lord Carrion is not home at the moment, Count. Why don't you rest and we will prepare lunch for you while you wait for Lord Carrion to get home?" the butler asked, anxious by how Rasmus looked at the hints of what had happened. "He's not home? Where is he?" Rasmus looked at the butler with his eyes narrowed. The butler hesitated, scratching the back of his ear, thinking if he should tell Rasmus about Carrion's whereabouts. "Lord Carrion." The butler paused as he lowered his head to hide his face. "Is at the brothel house right now, Count," he answered shamefully. Vidal's ears and eyes perked up when he heard the brothel's house. He immediately glanced at Rasmus, his eyes telling Rasmus to go and check that place. Rasmus already knew without having to look at Vidal, and he gave a slight nod to him. Vidal couldn't help but smile widely. "Can you tell me where it is?" "I'll visit him personally," Rasmus asked with a cold tone and a stoic face.
"Yes, Count."
"I'll send the servant to guide you there." The butler nodded with understanding and then signaled to one of the servants to guide Rasmus to the brothel house. Rasmus and Vidal followed the servant to the brothel house. The servant mentioned that the brothel house was only accessible to nobles or rich merchants. Hearing that, Vidal couldn't help but walk on his tiptoes, excited and impatient to go there. "This is the place, Lord Blackheart." The servant pointed at the building behind him. Rasmus looked at the building and it was indeed luxurious for a brothel house. The multi-story townhouse with lots of windows with silk curtains screamed luxury and elegance. "Here, take this," Rasmus offered a gold coin to the servant. The servant was baffled when he saw a gold coin as a reward for simply guiding Rasmus. The servant took the gold coin and bowed his head repeatedly, thanking him a few times before he left. Rasmus walked into the brothel house, and he was immediately welcomed by the strong scent of flowers and cigarettes. He watched nobles and merchants surrounded by dozens of beautiful and alluring women in revealing dresses, sitting comfortably on expensive leather sofas. The laughter and the giggles of those women were hypnotizing and alluring. A woman approached Rasmus with a long black pipe in between her fingers. She was dressed in a black off-the-shoulder gown adorned with intricate silver embroidery, emphasizing her refined and glamorous appearance. Her wide-brimmed black hat was decorated with black roses and delicate embellishments. Her dark, wavy hair cascades over one shoulder, framing her face beautifully. She wears elaborate jewelry, including dangling earrings and a choker necklace adorned with gemstones that complement the cool, dark tones of her outfit. "What can I help a lovely gentleman like you here in this sinful place?" The woman smiled as she checked Rasmus from top to bottom, biting her lip.
"How much?"
Rasmus looked at the woman with a warm gaze. 1 gold coin per woman and per service, of course, the woman answered and dragged her pipe. 2 gold coins for 3 women, 3 gold coins for 5 women, she puffed the smoke before she spoke with a playful smirk. Rasmus pulled out 5 eclats from thin air and then showed it to the woman. The woman's mouth gaped widely when she stared at the money papers in his hand.
Is this enough?
Rasmus asked. To rent all the lovely ladies here, just for an hour, he winked at the woman with a gentle smile. The woman cleared her throat as she exhaled deeply and fixed her dress.
Ladies,
the woman called with an alluring and soothing voice. All the women who were busy talking and pleasing the merchants and nobles suddenly stopped their hands. They all looked at the woman, beckoning them. They immediately got up and walked toward her as they fixed their dress and hair. All the merchants and nobles were confused when they were abandoned by those women.
Thank you, Count Blackheart.
We really appreciate your visit here, the woman smiled as she took the money from Rasmus's hand. So you know me already and pretend that you don't? Rasmus raised his brows. I just wanted to tease a handsome man, can you really blame me for that? The woman frowned as she crossed her arms. Anyway, enjoy the service. If you need anything from me, just call me Madame Erlina, she brushed her hand on Rasmus's chest. Vidal, you have an hour to please all these ladies, Rasmus said as he looked at those beautiful women behind the woman. Vidal smirked as he nodded and began to wrap his arms around those women. Erlina was surprised when Rasmus wasn't interested in the women and paid for his butler instead. Now, how much to rent you for an hour, Madame Erlina? Rasmus raised his brows.
Oh, darling.
Money can't buy me, Erlina chuckled softly, smiling at Rasmus. Not you but your time, Rasmus smiled back at Erlina.
Let me think.
Erlina tapped her red lips with her index finger. I'm quite busy right now, especially since I just took their women. I have to calm them down, don't I? She glanced at the merchants and nobles who were still in shock. Of course, there will always be next time, Rasmus nodded with understanding. Then can you tell me where Lord Carrion is? I have to speak with him, Rasmus asked as he looked at all the guests. Erlina slowly raised her brows and her demeanor changed into a serious one. He's on the 3rd floor, the room at the end of the hallway, the left wing of the building, Erlina answered with curiosity in her eyes. But he's busy right now if you know what I mean. So why don't you wait for him here? I'll accompany you once I'm done dealing with these unsatisfied guests, she winked at Rasmus. Rasmus nodded with understanding. Rasmus didn't want to sit down on any sofa in the brothel house because he didn't know what kind of stains lingered there. He watched Erlina try her way to persuade and calm all the guests with her charm. She handled it like walking in the park, giving them some understanding and offering something that those guests couldn't resist. After she handled all the guests and escorted them out of the building, she sighed as she rolled her eyes. She fixed her dress before she turned around to approach Rasmus, swaying her hips, a bit on the lip, and a tug of a smile on the side of her lips that anyone couldn't resist. Unfortunately, it didn't affect Rasmus at all. Now, my dear patron, I'm all yours for an hour. What do you want to do? Erlina chuckled as she stood in front of Rasmus, staring up into his eyes with her brown eyes. You're really good at this, Rasmus looked down at Erlina, impressed by her skill. You seem too experienced for someone who looks so young, especially in this kind of world, he added. Is that how are you going to play the game? Giving me flattery like it's nothing. Erlina raised her brows, swirling the smoking pipe in between her fingers. I have to admit, that affects me a little, she smiled as she placed her free hand on Rasmus's chest. Now, Erlina said as she slipped her hand into his suit, her eyes never leaving Rasmus's. What do you want to do, Count?
She asked in a soft voice.
Information about this beautiful city and its people, Rasmus answered as he grabbed Erlina's hand and gently pushed it away from his chest. Erlina sulked as she crossed her arms, looking away, giving Rasmus a cold treatment. She glanced at him, but she still couldn't believe nothing worked on him even after she tried her best and a different approach. I'll pay you, Rasmus raised his brows and pulled 1 eclat from thin air. Erlina looked at the money in Rasmus's hand, and she snatched it from his hand. She folded the money, but to Rasmus's surprise, she put the money in his suit's pocket.
Keep your money, my dear patron.
If you keep spending your money like that, you will be poor in no time, Erlina said with a serious expression. You have given me enough, so there's no need to spend more. At that moment, Rasmus knew that he had found someone interesting, someone who wasn't blinded by greed. Erlina wasn't the only one who was testing Rasmus, he was also testing her without her realizing it.
Now, shall we go to my office?
We can talk privately there while we enjoy a cup of tea, Erlina asked as she walked past Rasmus. She looked over her shoulder, signaling him to follow her. Rasmus followed Erlina into her office, which was on the 5th floor of the building. She told the servants to keep an eye on Carrion and told them to inform her when they saw Carrion leaving the room. Please have a seat, Count. Erlina pointed at the sofa as she grabbed nuts to feel her parrot the moment she walked into her office. Rasmus looked at how cozy the office was. Everything was dark red, from the carpet, the wall, and the curtains. The leather couch, the table, the chair, and the shelves were all dark brown, which suited well with the color of the room. The chandelier was framed with gold including the chain, and there were a few palm plants on each corner that gave a nice touch to the room. Now, what do you want to know first? Erlina asked as she fed her parrot. The trading companies and shipping companies. How many are there in this city? Rasmus asked as he made himself comfortable on the couch. Erlina hummed as she looked up, tilting her head slightly to think of the exact number. There are 8 trading companies. The Vivelda and the Urian trading companies are the big ones, Erlina answered as she brushed her hands and walked toward the couch. For the shipping companies, there are 5. The Vivelda and the Urian are the big ones as well, she added as she sat down, crossed her legs, and rested her hands on her thighs. That's a lot less than I thought, Rasmus hummed and nodded with understanding. Of course, there used to be a lot of them before. But the Vivelda and the Urian, both of them used some dirty tricks and made those trading and shipping companies bankrupt. Soon there will be less of them and they will monopolize this whole city, Erlina answered as she crossed her arms and stared at her parrot cracking nuts. Who owns those 2 companies? Rasmus looked at Erlina. Vivelda is owned by 2 people from 2 different families. Vivian Larn and Hilda Dr. They're well-known families from the western region, Erlina answered as she stared at her nails. For the Urian company, it belongs to the Urian family from the eastern region. Usman and Emain Urian, the filthy rich siblings, she added and blew her nails. Rasmus hummed as he crossed his arms, thinking that he should go to the bookstore to learn about those families. There were a lot of things that he needed to prepare for before he wanted to make a move. He needed to know with whom he was going to fight. So? Why are you interested in the trading and shipping companies? Erlina raised her brows, glancing at Rasmus. Well, you'll know the answer once you give me an answer for my next question, Rasmus said as he sat straight and took a sip of his tea. Do you know any shipwrights? The ones that are the best in this city. He glanced at Erlina with his brows raised. Erlina raised her brows, pushing herself up to sit straight after she realized what Rasmus was planning to do. She narrowed her eyes, staring at his face, trying to observe how much he knew about business since she knew well that Rasmus Blackheart wasn't a family who dwelled in business. Not to mention, he was abandoned and exiled since he was young, so it would be impossible for him to understand this kind of world. I know someone, he's good, really good, Erlina nodded, her eyes observing Rasmus's face. Are you going to make your own company and compete with those 2 giants? Erlina tilted her head. Yes, and I'm planning to take this city, monopolizing it, Rasmus answered with a serious expression. Erlina knew when someone was confident and knew what they were doing by looking into their eyes. She could see it in Rasmus's eyes, but she was unsure if she had misjudged it or if that was the case. So that's why you're looking for Carrion. You want his support, don't you? Erlina narrowed her eyes, her body had completely shifted toward Rasmus. I don't know how much money you have, but I suggest you spend it on something else. There are too many risks and you might regret it later, she warned. Rasmus slowly formed a smirk as he shifted his body toward Erlina. What's wrong? Are you worried about me, madam? Rasmus asked in a deep and soft voice, his face right in front of Erlina's. That's so nice of you. Erlina arched her brows and then scoffed, a wide smirk painted her face. She was caught off guard by Rasmus's words. When she was about to open her mouth, her servant knocked on the door, informing her that Carrion had finished and was waiting for her in the lobby. Thank you for the information, madam, Rasmus said as he stood up and fixed his suit. That means a lot to me. Erlina's eyes never left Rasmus's face, staring up at him and watching him fix his suit. She slowly rose from the couch and fixed her dress as well. I would love to see how will it go. I wish you a stroke of good luck, Count Blackheart. Erlina showed a faint smile at Rasmus. How generous of you, Rasmus smiled gently at her and then excused himself. Erlina watched Rasmus leave her office as she crossed her arms. She didn't blink her eyes and watched him walk in the long hallway with her servant guiding him. Rasmus Blackheart, what a charming man, Erlina smirked as she chuckled softly. Rasmus walked down the stairs and saw a man with slick black hair sitting on the sofa with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The man had pale skin and a handsome face that was almost too pretty for a man. He could understand why Garrett said that his little brother was narcissistic by the way the man dressed himself. When the man glanced at the stairs, he arched his brows as he took a sip of his whiskey. He knew exactly who Rasmus was from his white hair, and the fact he was there, he realized it was his brother who sent him. Carrion Earnwind, it's nice to finally meet you, Rasmus said as soon as he reached the last step of the stairs and walked toward Carrion. My brother sent you, didn't he? Carrion asked after he emptied the glass. What is it this time? He raised his brows and crossed his legs. Your brother want to get rid of you, Rasmus answered with a cold gaze as he stood in front of Carrion, looking down at him. Carrion wasn't threatened by Rasmus's words, his gaze was as cold as Rasmus's. He looked at the servant as he pointed at the empty glass, signaling the servant to refill his drink. That's new, Carrion scoffed as he leaned back, making himself comfortable on the couch. Well, your brother said that you're narcissistic and a man that's so full of himself. Seeing your current state, you're a failure, aren't you? Rasmus crossed his arms and gave a judging stare at Carrion. A man who can't control his emotions and desires, he pointed out. Carrion gritted his teeth, it was visible on his cheeks when he clenched his jaw muscles. He was pissed, his fists clenched and ready to punch Rasmus at any moment. But then I wonder, who's exactly is so full of himself, you or your older brother Garrett, Rasmus said as he stared at Carrion's fists. He wants to get rid of you so he can secure his position as the next head of the Earnwind family. He's afraid of your talent, he revealed. Carrion loosened up his fists, confused by what was going on and what Rasmus was trying to say. So what is it that you want from me? Are you going to get rid of me and become my brother's lackey? Carrion arched his brows, his expression still stiff and cold. That depends. Rasmus sighed as he sat on the same couch as Carrion, but he put a fair distance from him. Are you planning to stay miserable or do you want something fun? He looked at Carrion with his brows raised and glanced at the servant who came back with a glass of whiskey. How is that related to my question? Carrion narrowed his eyes at Rasmus as he grabbed the glass from the servant's hand. Staying in your brother's shadow like a useless second son of Earnwind or be someone that you can be proud of, Rasmus explained as he crossed his legs and looked at his wristwatch. I have seen the state of your mind from what I have observed from when I came into your mansion. You're disgusted and disappointed in yourself, using alcohol and women as your way to escape from it, he said as he pulled the sleeves of his suit. You drank a lot to the point of your skin became pale, your bags under your eyes showed that you could barely sleep at night. You break a lot of items in your mansion just because you can, and if I have to assume, you want to drain the money of your family because you loathe them, Rasmus added with a serious expression. You hate yourself for not meeting their expectation, and yet at the same time you'll hate yourself more for becoming someone that you're not. Carrion clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms when Rasmus managed to nail everything about his problem. He didn't expect a stranger could see it from a glance, and he didn't believe that Garrett had told Rasmus about it since Garrett never cared for him and it would be impossible for Garrett to understand his problem. Who are you? Carrion's voice was quiet. I'm just a man who offers you something that you won't regret, Rasmus answered as he stared into Carrion's eyes. Are you interested? Carrion was suspicious of Rasmus's intentions, especially when it was a stranger that he had just met and someone that Garrett had sent. He didn't know if he wanted to accept the offer or even believe Rasmus's words. Oh, grow some balls, Ryan, just accept his offer, Arlina scoffed as she walked down the stairs. How long are you going to escape from reality? And be a man for once? She added as she crossed her arms and walked toward the couch. Carrion was surprised that Arlina would suggest to him that he should accept Rasmus's offer. He knew Arlina so well that she wouldn't say something like that unless she knew what was going on and believed it was the right thing to do. Be a man? Am I not manly enough to satisfy your girls? Carrion scoffed and took a sip of his drink. You call that manly? You're nothing compared to Count Blackheart's butler, Arlina chuckled as she sat in between Rasmus and Carrion. What do you mean by that? Carrion furrowed his brows and stared at Arlina. Don't you realize by now that nobody is here and all my girls are gone? Arlina glanced at Carrion. As we speak, Count Blackheart's butler is pleasing all the 20 girls. You're nothing to him if you want to call yourself manly, she chuckled as she crossed her arms. Carrion was speechless that he felt defeated and didn't know what to react. He then glanced at Rasmus and couldn't believe someone would spend a lot of money on his butler, not to mention on girls in a brothel house. Anyway, just accept his offer, Ryan, Arlina said with a serious expression. Why? That's none of your business. Carrion responded as he looked away and drank his whiskey. Arlina grabbed Carrion's cheeks and forced him to look at her. Because I'm interested with his plan, Arlina answered and stared right into Carrion's eyes. I'm thinking that I would want to see it happening and perhaps joining hands with him as well, she added as she looked over her shoulder at Rasmus. Wait, hold on a minute. Carrion pushed Arlina's hand away from his face. What are you talking about? Can you tell me what's going on? He looked at both of them back and forth. Rasmus stood up and buttoned his suit. He then explained to Carrion about his plan. He explained that he wanted to compete with the Vivelda and the Orion companies in both trading and shipping. He wanted to monopolize the city and tried to get rid of all of the companies. Once Carrion heard everything, he couldn't help but laugh really hard because it was the funniest thing he had ever heard in a while. He had to wipe his eyes from the tears in his eyes because of it. "You don't believe me?" Rasmus raised his brows. "No, you're being delusional." Carrion chuckled as he shook his head. "Then what about a bet?" Rasmus crossed his arms. "If I could do it, your life is mine," he said with a serious expression, his eyes staring right into Carrion's soul. At that moment, Carrion's smugness disappeared and the way Rasmus looked at him was unnerving. He had never seen anyone with that confidence in his life, and the way Rasmus said that he wanted his life was disturbing. Erlina knew that Rasmus was confident and serious about it during her conversation with him. This time she knew that he was indeed confident and could do it from how she looked at his eyes. "What's the matter? Are you scared?" Rasmus smirked. "You said I'm being delusional, shouldn't you be confident that you would win the bet?" "All right, I accept the bet," Carrion said as he stood up. "If you couldn't, I want you to leave this place and go back to be my brother's lackey," he added and offered his hand for a handshake. Rasmus shook Carrion's hand firmly, and then suddenly they heard someone walk down the stairs. They looked at Vidal with messy hair and his tuxedo was a complete mess. "Madam, I think your girls can't service anyone for the rest of the day." "I apologize," Vidal said as he bowed his head with a satisfied face. "All of them?" Erlina was shocked. "All of them," Vidal grinned as he nodded.